We are very, very pleased to welcome you. In a moment or two, I am going to welcome you all more fully, to explain the order of the proceedings, and we will then be able to move to hear our guest speakers. Before we do that, I want to say that I'm very honoured as chair of the Communist Party of Britain to be asked to chair this meeting, and our party is very, very honoured too. A little more from us also in my opening. But before we do anything, I would like us to move to listen to the anthem of the Tudor Party of Iran. It is, of course, an event which celebrates the 80th anniversary of the Tudor Party of Iran. We will play the anthem first of all to remember all those who have given their lives in the struggle for peace and freedom and socialism in those 80 years. Comrades, the anthem of the Tudor Party of Iran. Thank you, comrades, and welcome again to everyone who is joining us. People are still coming in to this seminar. We are being joined from across the world, across the continent, and we are live streaming through the Communist Party of Britain's YouTube, Twitter, and Facebook, just so that everybody is aware. The meeting is being recorded. It will be, of course, edited and will be available on the Tudor Party site and on the relevant party sites around the world once we have done that. So once again, can I welcome you all most warmly to this seminar. The event is one of those occasions that is to mark the 80th anniversary of the Tudor Party of Iran, and we thank the Tudor Party for organising this international meeting. The Tudor Party's struggle has been absolutely glorious in those years, and especially remarkable in that for 7 out of those 8 decades, the Tudor Party has been working under conditions of suppression, violence, opposition, and not been able to work openly. From the Communist Party of Britain, I send the Tudor Party our greetings and our good wishes and our solidarity. Today, we have a most interesting and significant seminar planned to discuss communists and the social movements. And as I think most of you who are in this meeting will know, the themes are communists and the national democratic revolutions, communists and the issue of united fronts, and communists and political Islam. They are issues which touch us all in the international movement, and indeed all left and progressive people everywhere. Our programme this afternoon, we have divided it into 4 sessions. I will introduce first and our keynote speaker in just a moment. In the second session, we will have speeches from leadership of invited communist parties, so too in the third session. And in the fourth session, there will be questions and answers and discussion. Please can I ask everyone, please don't use the chat for questions. If you do have questions, please put them into question and answer. And that is being monitored to find your questions as we go along. So each session will be divided, as it were, by a short musical interlude. And when we come to the first of those, I will introduce that too. So I'd like now, without further ado, to move to introduce our keynote speaker. We are delighted to have you, Professor Ervand Abramian. Professor Ervand Abramian is Professor of History at Baruch College and the Graduate Center of the City University of New York. And he is regarded as one of the leading academic authorities on the history and politics of modern Iran. Ervand Abramian was born in Tehran, Iran, in 1940 to Armenian-Iranian parents. And he later studied at Oxford University in England and then at Columbia University in the United States. His PhD, awarded in 1969, was titled Social Basis of Iranian Politics, the Tudor Party, 1941 to 53. He is the author of a number of major works, including Iran Between Two Revolutions, 1982, Khomeiniism, Essays on the Islamic Republic, 1993, Tortured Confessions, Prisons and Public Recantations in Modern Iran, 1999, The Coup, 1953, CIA and the Roots of Modern US-Iranian Relations, 2013, and A History of Modern Iran, first published, I believe, in 2008 and recently revised and updated. Professor Abramian is rightly regarded as a preeminent scholar and one of the most influential historians on modern Iran, and we are absolutely delighted that he is able to be here to address today's important event. And I'm now going to give the floor to Professor Abramian. Thank you very much. You're very welcome.
Thank you for inviting me for this occasion. As you said, I'm a historian of modern Iran specializing in progressive movements. So what I want to focus on is the Tudeh Party after World War II as a mass movement. We can call it a social movement, and try to explain why it was so successful as a broad-based movement in this period. And then later on, we'll talk about why the situation changed in the later period. And the Islamic Revolution was, of course, very different from the 1940s. But in the period, the Tudeh Party was created in 1941, but it quickly became a mass movement based basically in two classes, the intelligentsia, and I won't go through names, but it's, if you look at the famous writers, journalists, playwrights, artists of that period, almost everyone was either in the Tudeh Party or very close to the Tudeh Party. So their names reads like a who's who of prominent intellectuals, all of them very closely allied to the Tudeh Party. And also, the mass base of the party was very much the working class. The Central Council of Federated Trade Unions became a nationwide, basically, mass movement, very well organized. And the height of this you can see in two general strikes in 1946 and 1951. The 51 actually propelled the nationalization of the oil industry. And in both cases, you find diplomatic reports from the British embassy talking about how really the Tudeh Party was in control of the oil industry because it had such grassroots organizations throughout that industry. And also wherever there were factories, such as in the textile mills, Tudeh Party was the main force. The government did try to create yellow unions. They failed. There were also competing trade unions organized by the so-called Toilers Party, which was a Titoist party financed by the CIA that also failed, really. And the Tudeh Party was a predominant force in the labor movement throughout this period. So what one is faced with is, how does one explain the great appeal, the mass appeal of the Tudeh Party in this period, 41 to 53? And I would propose 5 major reasons for it. One is, of course, the Tudeh Party very much stressed in its discourse and program class conflict, especially against the Tavera Bala, the upper class of landlords, upper bourgeoisie, the court, and senior military officers. And this language of class conflict very much fitted into the temper of the time of that period, because even conservatives and liberals very much saw Iran as divided very much along class lines. And they also used this class language, although they tried to spin it in a more conservative way. So you can say the main language of the Tudeh Party in that period was class conflict. And this really fitted into the national discourse of the time. But besides that, there's something else more also important that explains the Tudeh success, is the Tudeh Party also saw itself really in the traditions of the Enlightenment, especially the radical Enlightenment of the French Revolution, which then was pursued in the Russian Revolution. And it saw itself also a continuation of the Iranian Constitutional Revolution of 1906, which itself, the Constitutional Revolution, saw itself as part of the Enlightenment. So if you look at the literature of the Tudeh Party in the 1940s, it is very much stressing the importance of not just the symbols of the French Revolution, but the ideals of liberty, equality, fraternity, the notion that one has natural rights. These are rights not given by above by God to you, but they're natural to you, inherent to you, inalienable to you, and therefore they should not be basically walked over. And if you look at the program of the Tudeh Party in 1941, right after the fall of Reza Shah's autocracy, the stress is very much on individual rights of speech, organization, and religious beliefs. And these fitted in very much with the Constitutional Revolution and the ideas of the Enlightenment. And in fact, if you go before the creation of the Tudeh Party to Taqi Arani's writings, his journal Donia, it is very much in the tradition of the radical history of the European Enlightenment. So this again fitted in with the period, that period after 45, where the mood in the country was very much about protecting individuals' rights from the fear of return of autocracy like Reza Shah's. And if you look at the literature that was published in Mardom, which is the main journal of the Tudeh Party in the 40s, it is very much in tune with the ideas of the Enlightenment of liberty, individual rights. Later on, some ultra-leftists tended to dismiss these rights as bourgeois rights, forgetting that actually for Marx and also for radicals through the 19th century, individual rights were not just bourgeois rights. These rights were very much tied to socioeconomic rights, and that socioeconomic rights bolstered and protected individual rights, that individual rights by themselves may not be meaningful without social and economic rights. So the Tudeh Party at this period did not separate the two and dismiss individual rights as basically bourgeois rights. It very much would tie the two. And as you can see actually in the introduction, the slogan of the Tudeh Party was non-kar azadi, i.e. bread, work, and freedom. Freedom being basically individual freedoms. So these, I would say, put the discourse of the Tudeh party very much in the discourse of the time, which was protection of rights, of defense of liberties against the threat of return to autocracy of Reza Shah. A third argument I would give for why the Tudeh party was successful was that it tapped very much into a national identity, national sentiment, without resorting to racism and Aryanism. Under Reza Shah, the nationalism had taken the form, had been influenced by not just fascism, but Nazi ideas of Aryanism. And people like Arani and the founders of the Tudeh party were very much against any notions of race and use of the racism. But they paid due respect to Iranian identity. And again, you can see this in the literature on the stress on the question of the Shahnameh, Nowruz, the Iranian New Year, Mehregan, historical figures in Iranian history like Mazdak, so that it was clearly a national patriotic movement in addition to being a socialist movement. Also in this basically discourse about history, the past, it was also respectful of religion without bringing religion into politics. Again, it followed the traditions of the Enlightenment and the French Revolution of secularism. It did not criticize religion, but it considered religion as a personal belief of individuals. And if you were a Muslim or a Baha'i or a Sunni or a Christian, that was your private belief. It was nothing to do with politics. And this, again, at that time fitted into the notion that the citizens had individual rights. One of their rights was to have their religious beliefs. A fourth reason, I would say, explains the Tudeh success was it produced a viable organization based on the principles of democratic centralism. There were elections, there were a hierarchy of organizations from cell to provincial committees, all the way to national committees, central committee, and so on. And there were, in fact, free debate. There were the congresses that were held were quite actually open discussions, competitive elections. And this introduced into Iran for the first time a real political party organization. In fact, the Tudeh party was the first organization to have a viable system or organization. It still remains actually the only organization that has this. Iran has remained very devoid of real political parties with elections and central democratic centralism. The parties tended to be around individual personalities. And once the individual personalities left politics or died, that organization withered away. But the Tudeh party, as you can see, has survived for 80 years because it stressed the importance of organization based on the notions of the democratic centralism. Another reason, a fifth reason I would say, that explains the Tudeh party's success is that in this period, after 1941, all the way to the coup 53, there was an opening in the political system so people could organize. Before 41 and after, of course, after 53, the system was closed. There was no breathing space for political organizations to set up basically trade unions or professional organizations. But in this period, there was enough opening which then opposition groups could organize. And of the people who organized, of course, the most successful were the Tudeh Party and to some lesser extent the National Front, which was not that well organized, but it also did have a mass basis because it could appeal to people. Even after 1947, where there were restrictions on the Tudeh Party, in 49 officially the Tudeh Party was made illegal, it was still able to organize under Mossadegh through front organizations like the Peace Partisans or the Society Against Imperialist Oil Companies. So although formally the Tudeh Party could not openly organize it, people knew that these organizations were really led and inspired by the Tudeh Party. So the opening, I would say, is crucial for a mass movement to be able to function. Finally, the explanation for the success, you have to go back to pre-Tudeh Party, in that in 1941, the Tudeh Party was able to bring into its fold a number of veteran trade unionists from the early 20s who had also organized actually a general strike in the oil against the oil company in Abadan. And these veteran trade union organizers were, in fact, then the nucleus of the new labor movement that came into being in 1941, lasted to 53. It's often thought that, as long as you have the right slogans, you put a poster up, workers of the world unite, people are going to flock into the organization. In fact, you need people who have the confidence of rank and file, who have a tradition, who have a historical background, who've been in prison, who could be trusted as trade union organizers. And the Tudeh Party in 1941-53 definitely had that, especially in the key industries of oil and textiles. So these, I would say, are the reasons I can explain why the Tudeh Party quickly grew into a mass movement. Now, the obvious question that arises for people, especially for outsiders, is if the socialist movement and also the nationalist movement under Mossadegh was so important in this period, why is it that when the revolution did come in 1978-79, it was not under the banner of socialism or nationalism, but under the banner of Islam? Actually, before I get to this issue, another question that is often rises: if the Tudeh Party was such a mass movement, a social movement, why was it not able to carry out a revolution by 1953? Was it due to bad leadership, tactical or strategic mistakes? The disaster of 53 becomes the focus point. Here one has to look at actually when do revolutions occur. Revolutions don't occur only because there are mass movements, mass protest movements. You have to have at some point a breakdown of the state structure so that the mass movement can actually then take over the state. But the state first has to collapse for some reasons. That's why historically, people often talk about this or that revolution, but there are very few actual revolutions in world history. And the ones that do have happened is usually when the state actually collapses. In France in 1789, the state collapsed because it was literally bankrupt. In 1917, the Russian Tsarist state collapsed because of it, basically the shock of World War I. The Chinese state collapsed because of the Japanese invasion. So these were destructions of the state that permitted a mass movement then to take over. In Iran, despite the mass protests, the state actually survived, and I won't go into it, but in part because of American assistance and military and financial assistance to the establishment. And so there was no possibility really of a revolution in Iran in 1953. There were mass protests, there were mass general strikes, but these could not be converted into an overthrow of the regime because the state itself was still actually very much intact, especially the military. Now, going back to the question then of what the appeals of 53, why those appeals were no longer there in 78, 79. Many people thought when the Shah left in 78, 79, history would return to 53. There would be a mass movement of the Tudeh party and the National Front, and things could go back to as it had been in 53. This did not occur. And the obvious, simple answer to why history didn't continue as 53, the simple answer is, of course, that under the Shah, the dictatorship, the Savak, opposition organizations like the Tudeh and the National Front were dismantled through police surveillance, torture, imprisonment, executions, nothing like, of course, the mass killings like in Iraq or the mass killings in Indonesia, but enough repression to dismantle the organizations. This left a vacuum. And when the protests started in the 70s, the vacuum was filled by the only organizations that were still intact, which was the mosque organizations, informal but nationwide religious organizations, and their close allies, the Bazaar. So when the revolution did come, it was very much not a working class revolution or the revolution of the intelligentsia. It was very much a revolution of the petty bourgeoisie, of the clerics, and of the bazaar. And this explains, of course, why the ideology of the revolution was not socialism or nationalism. It was much more that of Islam. So this is, I think, the easy answer for why the change. But there is, I think, a more complicated answer that needs to be investigated. And I'm not sure anyone I've read that has dealt into this, which is on a global scale, what you find is if in the language of the 1940s and 50s, socialism and nationalism were the language of protest. In the 1970s, you find a shift away from nationalism, socialism, to the language of return to roots, return to the past. This is not just in Iran with the notion of Gharb Zadagi, or the notion of the things coming from the West being bad, but you find it throughout other countries, like in India and so on, that especially and also in Africa, searching for mystical and favorable roots, not in the future as progressives have in the past looked towards, a bright future, but searching for some sort of return to the past as the answer. And this, of course, you find in Iran comes very much with the writers, people like Shariati, who were anti-regime, but also religious, and their interpretation of Islam was very radical, and their idea was to return to these roots. And by returning to roots, they were rejecting what they called the contamination of the West. And in this contamination of the West, they threw in the Enlightenment as something bad, something to be rejected. In fact, they negated the notions of the constitutional revolution, the Enlightenment, and were searching for some sort of ideal that they thought existed in early history of what they would view as Islam, but of Shiism. And this, of course, was an easy way to appeal to people on the street level, because, you know, many people were religious, and it was easy to say, well, you know, we have the answer in religion. And this changed the whole discourse. Even conservatives took to the notion of return to roots. They had different roots, but the general notion was looking at the past in a way for the ideals of the future. So you find an unholy alliance in Iran of courtiers, such as Nash, talking about the ideals of mysticism in Islam. You have people, third worldism, it's like Naraghi, who talks about the rejection of the West. And then you get religious radicals like Shariati, who talk about basically rejection of the Western notions of liberty. Now, the trouble with this return notion is, of course, we see nowadays, is if one is returning to Shiism, why shouldn't other people return to their origins, Sunnism or Hinduism? And this becomes a sure recipe for communal conflict, sectarian conflict, and division of society along religious lines. And the consequence of this, the logical consequence of this, is what you see basically with the creation of ISIS and the return of intense conflicts between not only Hindus and Muslims, but also between Sunnis and Shias, between Christians and Muslims. So what was in the 70s and 80s seen like a success, return to roots, by the 21st century, it now shows that there are dangers in this. And the dangers, as they become obvious, become more and more religious wars. The appeals of the Enlightenment actually can return. And one can see this actually in Iran, that the younger generation has actually rediscovering the appeals of the Enlightenment and of the Mashrutiyat. Just to end the talk, I noticed in the last couple of years, there have already been 3 new books on the importance of Taqi Arani in Iranian history. There's a rediscovery that actually the Enlightenment, the notion, especially the radical notions of the Enlightenment, have much to say to the contemporary problems, much more to say than the idea of rejection of the West and return to mythical roots of the distant past, which is very fuzzy and actually very problematic. What you find when you go back to medieval or even pre-medieval 7th century Arabia. And I will stop there. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much, Professor Bromnian. That was a fantastic opening to our event today. We hope that we've got time for a couple of questions, and we do have one that has come in. I'm just bringing it up on my screen here, sorry. That someone is asking, what legacy, if any, do you believe continues to endure from the Tudor party in the period covered by your talk this afternoon, your address? What legacy endures in today's politics and society in Iran? I wonder whether you could answer that. We do have to finish about 2:55, but I hope you have time to answer that one. Thank you so much.
Yes, there are two legacies, I would say. I mean, one is that indirectly, because the Tudeh party's program, especially on socioeconomic reforms, had such appeal, when the Islamic movement took off, it actually borrowed greatly from the Tudeh party program. So what you get on the Khomeinism is not traditional Islam, but it's a sort of new populist Islam that appeals to the urban poor, what they called mustazafin, the dispossessed. So there was a lot of this resonance in the rhetoric that is borrowed from the Tudeh party. But more than that, I think the legacy, the endurance, is that the ideas of the Enlightenment, of equality, liberty, secularism, although they were repressed or basically overshadowed by Islam during the Islamic Revolution, they're now actually returning. The younger generation is, in fact, rediscovering this. They may not know that it was the Tudeh party that kept it alive, but very much it's the literature of the 40s. If they look at that, they'll find that, in fact, it was very much brought into Iran. In fact, I would say the Enlightenment, the notions of the French Revolution were brought to Iran by the generation of the Tudeh party, both in the 40s and early before the 40s. And that has, I think, the way forward for the future. And therefore, the legacy, I think, continues in that way in the culture.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, we have another question in which I think we've got time for. The notion of searching or going back to the roots, is that in any way brought about by resurgent feudalism?
Sorry, I didn't catch the last part of that question.
Okay, sorry. The notion of searching or going back to roots, did in a way bring about resurgent feudalism? Is that correct? That's the question.
A resurgence of feudalism? No, because the people who searched for roots looked for mythical past pre-feudalism. So they considered feudalism also something terrible. But somehow before feudalism, there had been some sort of utopian ideal for the Shias. It was in Medina under Muhammad. And therefore, if they could go back to that, there would be basically the ideal society. So it was a rejection of capitalism, feudalism, and searching for something that they thought existed in way past in 17th century in Medina. But the problem with that is, of course, Sunnis could go back to that same period and could learn very different lessons from that. So the more you look at the historical evidence of Medina in the 7th century, the more problems you have. And it's hardly an ideal society you want to go back to.
Okay, thank you very much. We've got another question, but before I ask that, I just wanted to say to everyone who is on this call today that one or two of you are putting in questions and you'll be wondering why we're not answering them. It's because they are questions that are specifically directed to the Tudor party of Iran. And when it comes to their turn, they are aware of your questions and they will cover them. So I just wanted to make that clear. Yes, we have another question. What is the role of the author Jalal al-Ahmad by his famous Westernization book in popularizing back to the roots discourse? And do you think that perhaps he has played a more important role than Shariati in this?
I didn't catch, the sound was bad. The very first part of the question, who besides Shariati was the name mentioned?
Jalal al-Ahmad. I'm sorry if my pronunciation is not good. Al-Ahmad.
Jalal al-Ahmad.
Yeah, I mean, actually, there was someone else, a philosopher, Heidegger, the Heideggerian philosopher, who started the term rejection of the West. Again, like Heidegger, people had trouble understanding him. It's very abstruse language. But there was a general trend at that time. You can't pinpoint it to one person. Al-Ahmad is the first person who wrote a pamphlet on it, and then others picked it up. But you even have people in the court, very conservative people, taking it as a way of rejecting the West, saying, well, human rights, question of about prison conditions and so on. These are all Western rights and Western ideas. We reject that. We want to go back to our own roots. So it becomes a useful theme for people across the board to latch onto. And what you have to find is when they latch on, what is it about the West they're rejecting? Actually, you could say, well, someone like Al-Ahmad was rejecting Western consumerism. Shariati was rejecting Western imperialism. But when you come to religious theologians, their rejection is the whole notion that rights come from nature, that human beings are born with natural rights. This is very much against their belief that basically, if you have any rights, they come from God, and who interprets those rights is the clergy themselves. So their reason for rejecting the Enlightenment is very different, but the discourse on the whole becomes universal, that ideas from the West are bad, should be rejected.
Okay, thank you very much. I think we've probably got time for one more. Was the Tudor party, in your view, compromised significantly by the reality of or propaganda about its fraternal relationship with the USSR? So was the Tudor party compromised significantly by the reality of or propaganda about its fraternal relationship with the USSR?
Yes, and actually, a surprising thing is that despite the problems of being identified with this Soviet Union, the Tudeh Party was able to overcome that and still become a mass movement. There are really two periods where the Tudeh Party, I think, is a drawback for the Tudeh Party. The Soviet Union is a drawback for the Tudeh Party. One is the so-called Azerbaijan crisis, where an autonomous provincial government is set up under the auspices of the Soviet Union at the end of World War II. But then that basically quickly ends. That ceases to be a problem, but the Tudeh party actually had opposed the creation of that autonomous provincial government, but publicly had to accept it because the Soviets supported it for a while. The second reason was oil, the request by the Soviets to have an oil concession in the north. And this brought out a division between the nationalists and the Tudeh, in that at first the nationalists talked about nationalization of all oil. The Tudeh tended to talk about nationalization of southern oil. But again, this didn't last long. And any of the drawbacks you had by 1953, they were not significant. So you find many, you could say, nationalists, some writers like Bahar, who you would think would be critical of the Tudeh for pro-Soviet positions, were closely identified with the Tudeh party by August of '53. So the surprising thing is, despite that, I would say, link, identity. And of course, you have to remember, in Iran, the Soviet Union was identified with Tsarist Russia, and Tsarist Russia was the national enemy of Iran since the 17th, 18th century. So there was the national history there. But despite that, you find the Tudeh party actually still became a mass movement.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. I think that is sadly as many questions as we can get in for you, Professor Abramian. But I want to thank you again so much for joining us. I'm not sure whether you'll be able to stay for the whole meeting. Of course, we really hope that you can. But thank you very much for that opening, for all the really, really significant and very deep issues that you've managed to cover, and for that very comprehensive coverage that you have given. So valuable to us. We're absolutely delighted that you could come, and we hope to see you again on future occasions. Thank you very, very much indeed.
Thank you for inviting me, and I will be, of course, listening throughout the conference. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Okay, what we're going to do now is, in just a few minutes, is to have our first musical interlude. Each musical interlude will be a piece of piano playing by a young Iranian concert pianist, Sarah. And I know that you'll really, really enjoy that music. The first piece is about 3.5 minutes long, just so that you know how long it will be. Can I just repeat that if you have asked a question and it didn't get answered, Tudeh Party comrades are very aware that you have asked it, and their speakers will try to cover that in their talk. After the music, which Sarah is going to play, we are going to have speeches from the Tudeh Party of Iran, AKEL of Cyprus, and the South African Communist Party. So if those speakers could be prepared in that order to speak. There won't be any question and answers after those speeches. We will have a third session with further speeches, and then our fourth session will be questions and discussion on everything that has taken place in this event this afternoon. So when the music starts, you will see a screen, a rather beautiful screen with some writing in Farsi on it. Those of you who do not read Farsi, it says, "Greetings on the occasion of the Tudeh Party's 80th anniversary." So if the technical team could now play our first piece by Sarah. Thank you very much. Thank you so much, Sarah. That was absolutely beautiful. And I'd like to say to everyone who is on this call, that details of the 3 pieces of music that Sarah will have played by the end of the event will be posted on the chat. Can I also announce before we start the our next session that the event is being live streamed on the Tudor Party of Iran's Facebook. So that is, of course, in addition to the live streaming from the Communist Party of Britain. So it is on the Tudor Party of Iran's Facebook. Now, I'd like to introduce our next speaker from the Tudor Party of Iran, Navid Shomali. Navid Shomali is the International Secretary of the Tudor Party of Iran. He became involved in political protests in Iran from the spring of 1970. He was a student activist against the Shah's dictatorship during his university years. In 1975, he became a supporter of the banned Tudor Party of Iran, which he formally joined in the immediate wake of the 1979 revolution. During the 1980s, he was active in the organization of the Tudor Party of Iran in exile. In the late 1980s and early 1990s, he represented the Tudor youth of Iran on the General Council of the World Federation of Democratic Youth, WFDY. In 1993, he was elected to the Central Committee of the Tudor Party of Iran, and from the 4th Congress of the party in 1998, he has served as the Politburo member responsible for international relations and affairs. He was re-elected to the Central Committee and Politburo of the party at its 5th and 6th Congresses. Comrade Navid, the floor is yours. Okay, I think no one can hear Navid. I'm just going to check. Could the technical team just check Navid is unmuted? Thank you. Navid, the floor is yours.
Dear comrades and friends, firstly, allow me on behalf of the Central Committee of the Tudor Party of Iran to thank all of our comrades from the fraternal parties and our esteemed guest, Professor Abrahamian, for agreeing to take part in this important seminar. This meeting is a clear show of international solidarity and determination of the communist and workers' parties to work together against monopoly capitalism, imperialism, and neoliberal economics in our struggle for another world and socialism. Comrades, as you are aware, the 2nd of October marked the 80th anniversary of the founding of Tudor Party of Iran, the party of the Iranian working class and toilers, and successor to the Communist Party of Iran, which was established in 1920. The party, having been established by a group of political prisoners released from Reza Shah's prison in 1941, soon became the largest organized political party in Iran with a broad class and social base. Looking at the important themes of our international seminar, I can positively state that our party, in its 80-year-long history, has been engaged in a struggle which has encompassed efforts to form a national alliance based on the democratic transformational stage in order to bring about fundamental changes in Iran, as well as the 4 decades-long fight against political Islam. Given the necessary limitation time-wise, I will briefly cover some aspect of our party's work in building national alliances and fronts, but will concentrate on Iran's National Democratic Revolution of 1979 and the important historic lessons learned from its tragic defeat. Beginning with the first theme, communist parties, broad social movement and alliances. Within 3 years of its establishment in 1941, our party created one of the largest social movements seen in Iran contemporary history. In 1944, the party established the Central United Council of the Trade Unions of Workers and Toilers of Iran. At its peak, this organization had 400,000 members, including 90,000 from Khuzestan oil fields and 165,000 from the textile industries of the major cities. In total, 186 unions were affiliated to this body. The party also worked hard in creating progressive fronts to combat reaction and imperialist intervention. In 1943, the party established the Freedom Front, consisting of the country's progressive forces as well as prominent newspaper editors. This was followed by the establishment of the anti-dictatorial Press Front in May 1948 and the National Society Against Colonialism in 1949. The rise of the oil nationalization movement in Iran in the 1950s posed a serious threat to the interest of colonialism and imperialism, not only in Iran, but also in the Middle East as a whole. It was on this basis that the infamous US-Britain-backed coup d'etat in 1953 was organized to defeat the oil nationalization movement and to crush the Tudeh Party of Iran. Indeed, the coup d'etat dealt a significant blow to our party and the progressive forces in Iran for many years afterward. Iran's National Democratic Revolution. From a theoretical Marxist-Leninist standpoint, the Tudeh Party of Iran believes that social revolution means a substantial change in the social system which gives rise to a new and progressive relations of production corresponding to the level of development of productive forces, its basis being the constant change of material production. Thus, what we describe as the National Democratic Revolution is not the same as the social revolution. It is not a fundamental solution to the contradiction between labor and capital within the capitalist society, but at a stage of change, laying the preconditions for social revolution. In other words, under the present conditions, our country's imperative and paramount need is to the transition from the dictatorship stage to the national democratic stage. And standing in our country's way is the ruling theocratic regime, which we believe cannot be reformed. Comrades, despite attempts by the regime's leaders and their propaganda machinery to portray the Iranian Revolution of 1979 as an Islamic revolution, it was in fact a national democratic revolution, a classical example of a mass anti-dictatorial movement in the special circumstances of developments of capitalism in Iran. In the 1960s and 70s, Iranian society faced a profound structural crisis due to the expansion of capitalist relations with representatives of the comprador bourgeoisie class dominating the political and economic life of the country. The increasing influence of imperialist capital in Iran's economy, with a brutal police state in place to safeguard the despotic client regime, resulted in mounting pressure upon the country's middle strata and petty bourgeoisie. The Shah's half-hearted land reform also caused the mass migration of impoverished people from the countryside into the cities, many with deeply conservative and religious beliefs. This gave the growing working class an increasingly important social weight within the class structure of our society, The 1979 revolution therefore arose from serious socio-economic crisis and class contradictions created by the dominating interest of the comprador bourgeoisie and the despotic rule of a corrupt pro-Western regime. It mobilized millions of people, from workers, peasant, and petty bourgeoisie to sections of the small and medium national bourgeoisie against the Shah's regime. It is also vitally important to note the savage suppression of the left forces, including our party, during the 1960s and the 70s, contrasting with the relative freedom to operate granted to the religious forces, as the Shah saw them as useful counters to the secular left. This meant that the religious forces were far better organized and prepared through their network of mosques to play a significant role in the events that led to the victory of the Iranian Revolution. The Iranian Revolution successfully completed its political phase of the overthrowing the Shah's dictatorial regime and dislocating the forces of imperialism. It was clear to our party that for the revolution to succeed, it needed to evolve to replace the socio-economic order that had prevailed under the Shah with a new order. Much of our party's slogan and platforms indicating the nationalization of, including the nationalization of banks and major companies, was carried out in the atmosphere that existed in the first year after the revolution. At the time, conscious of challenges facing the revolution, our party called for the formation of a popular People's United Front with other revolutionary forces to make sure that the revolutionary movement would not be derailed, but this did not materialize due to the significant political differences between those forces. Of course, it is now clear that Khomeini and his followers were a manifestation of political Islam, up to then a relatively unknown quantity in our region. In his famous thesis, Wilayat Faqih, Governance of the Islamic Jurist, published in the early 1970s, Khomeini articulated that Islam is not just a religion, but rather a system of governance that needs to be realized. Our party overlooked this ideological aspect of Khomeini's manifesto based on political Islam and its social class base. In our party's analysis of the early years of the revolution, we have concluded that in our policy of critical unity with Khomeini's leadership, we were more concerned with the unity component of that approach than being critical of some of the regime's policies that were clearly not in line with the revolutionary ideals nor the people's demands. Had the left and other national democratic forces managed to form a united front to this end, it would have been possible to counter the nascent Islamist trend and change the balance of forces politically in the country. However, the reactionary Islamist forces, in a matter of 3 years, were able to attack the left and democratic forces one by one, and then impose their absolute rule based on the political Islam in Iran. Thus, Iran has remained at the stage prior to the national democratic transformation, and the Tudeh Party of Iran is committed to our country realizing the following objectives: separation of a state from religion, establishment of human and democratic rights, including free trade union activities, removing all discrimination based on gender, belief, and ethnicity, and realization of social justice, the safeguarding of national sovereignty, the rollback and elimination of the neoliberal economic structures imposed by the Islamic Republic, the limiting of growth of capitalism, and a redirection toward growth and development of productive forces within the national economy, and the fair distribution of materials, resources, and wealth. The Tudeh Party of Iran continues to believe that such a change requires the formation of united anti-dictatorial front by mobilizing all social forces within our country and the emergence of a strong union of left and progressive forces with effective participation of the working class. The Tudeh Party of Iran considers the most urgent goal of progressive forces in Iran is being to work together to prepare the ground for an end once and for all to the absolute rule of supreme religious leader and to open the way for fundamental and enduring democratic change in our country. The Iranian Revolution taught us that in the post-dictatorship period, without the significant role and leadership of the working class and its allies, there remains the danger that the main goal of fundamental socio-economic and political change will go unfulfilled. The defeat of the Iranian Revolution contains valuable lessons about the importance of a class-based alliance for the defending of democracy, national sovereignty, and democratic freedoms and rights. Experience in Iran and elsewhere has shown that an alliance with the right-wing forces who do not believe in the democratic rights and freedoms is ultimately a one-sided relationship doomed to failure, reaction, and bloody dictatorship. Comrades, like our party, many progressive forces in our region underestimated the nature and rapid growth of political Islam during the 1980s. Amidst the Cold War, US-led imperialism saw a strong ally in political Islam in its fight against socialism. Despite the rhetoric of those days, the US actively assisted the emerging Islamist forces with funds and logistical support as they brought havoc to the region, many of which continue to constitute a destructive force and hindrance to the progress of our societies today. In our view, the struggle of the communist and working class forces in our region against dictatorships goes hand in hand with the struggle against political Islam, as well as imperialism and its allies in the region. The close collaboration between all progressive forces in our region, particularly those in the communist movement, is of paramount importance in this regard and in this struggle. Thank you very much, comrade.
Thank you very much, Comrade Naveed. I'm going to move now to our next speaker. Since 10 or 12 minutes ago, there's been a slight change. We were going to take next, we were going to be delighted to welcome Comrade Aristos Amianou from Akel, Cyprus. We have just heard in the last minute that he is unable to participate today. He is ill in hospital. So we're going to send the good wishes of the meeting to the Comrade Aristos. He is elected to the Central Committee of Akel in 2005 and the Politburo in 2015. We're very, very sorry that we don't have him with us. We do, however, have Comrade Vera Policarpou, who is here to participate in the discussion session at the end. But we have very quickly asked her if she would prepare a contribution in place of Comrade Aristos. And because we have done that, I would like to move to Comrade from South Africa first, so that Vera has a minute or two more to put something together to offer this meeting. And we do thank you so much, Comrade Vera, for stepping in. But I'm going to go first of all to Comrade Chris Matuhalku. He the former provincial secretary of the CP in the Northern Cape after the banning of political parties, and he currently is the second deputy general secretary of the party. He joined the party in the underground movement while it was still banned in the late 1980s as a student activist at the University of Western Cape. He served as a Politburo member, Secretary for International Relations and Affairs of the party. He is also the General Secretary of the Friends of Cuba Society, a solidarity platform with Cuba and the Cuban Revolution. He serves on a huge number of bodies of the left, of communists and progressive forces across the world. And he is also coordinator of the Africa Left Network Forum, which is a platform for coordinating left and progressive forces on the African continent. Chris, Comrade Chris, we are absolutely delighted to have you. The floor is yours.
Yeah. No, thank you very much, Comrade Liz, for the introductions. Indeed, we are very honored to be a part of this very important seminar that seeks to, draw lessons and share our experiences and also to learn from each other's struggles. And that for us is an important matter to continue to engage in, but also to just acknowledge the presentations that were made before, which, I think were very significant in many ways. They were illuminating in many aspects, and thank you very much for those who presented before us. What we thought we could do is to, I think, focus a little bit on the South African situation and how, the theory of revolution, at least for us, in the progressive movement in South Africa, developed that basis and that praxis that was able to bring us to where we are in this period. So we will flag a few things and do a bit of a, just a narrowing in of in respect of the implications of the National Democratic Revolution in the context of South Africa and how that played itself out, both formulating a theory for our revolution, but also strategies and tactics for engagement in the broad struggle. I think all of us will know that the Commission on the National and Colonial Questions, which dealt with imperialism and the working class struggles in the colonies, where Lenin made these contributions, was very important in developing the very notion of the National Democratic Revolution. Lenin argued, I quote, "The proletariat parties in backward countries must support bourgeois democratic government in instigating a revolution by the exploited masses," close quote, around 1920. So this national revolutionary movement would be called that instead of it being referred to as a bourgeois democratic movement. That was also very important because that nomenclature captured what we want to believe was a correct articulation. Consequently, the Second Congress of the Comintern adopted the phrase the National Revolutionary Movement. Such movements, however, also had, as in the case of South Africa, as you will know, the democratic component, and hence this notion of the National Democratic Revolution. And as a follow-up to the Second Congress of the Comintern, the first international anti-colonial conference, which was held in Baku, where the same sentiments were expressed, also discussed the notions of class alliances and how this should be developed. And in the immediate aftermath of all of these important developments taking place, in 1921, the South African Communist Party was founded in July in Cape Town, and it immediately became affiliated to a committee. So when these developments were taking place, when these discussions were taking place at an international level, the founding of the party finds itself in the midst of all of these important discussions, and it enters the fray. And if you know the history of the party in South Africa, you will know that the forebearers of the party by 21 were in the main white immigrants who brought to South Africa traditions of trade unionism and progressive struggles of the communist movement from abroad when they came to work in the industrializing South African mines. But one of the drawbacks with that was that the Communist Party of South Africa fell short of uniting South African working class, black and white. In that history, in 1922, there was a white workers' strike that took place on the Witwatersrand, and one of the slogans that they articulated was "White Workers Unite." So in that context, working class unity was not arrived at. By the 7th annual conference of the Communist Party of South Africa, it adopted a radical new program under the supervision of the Comintern at the time, where it said, among other things, what was needed in South Africa was to achieve an independent South African native republic as a stage towards a workers' and peasants' republic. And this would form the basis for the Comintern thesis, the Native Republic thesis in 1928. And in that 1928, in Moscow, its executive committee adopted a resolution on the South African question. Indeed, South Africa was described as a British dominion of a colonial type. And therefore, in that resolution, it stated that the development of capitalist production in South Africa was led by British imperialism, manifesting as economic exploitation of a country through the participation of the white bourgeoisie in South Africa, Brit, and Boer. So it inserted the notion of class and race immediately into that question, which came to be known as the South African question. The South African question was brought into sharper focus by the phenomenon of the majority of the peasant-owned land, almost 87% of that land, being expropriated by a white minority. And this question would become one of the key cornerstones of the future revolution as this was unfolding in South Africa. The Native Republic thesis also resolved, among other things, that the Communist Party of South Africa should also pay particular attention to the embryonic organizations being spearheaded by natives. And the ANC, which was formed in 1912, was at that point the organization which the party identified. And in fact, some of the few Africans that were part of the South African Communist Party, the Communist Party of South Africa at the time, were also members of the African National Congress. So the overtures towards the ANC also came about as an objective reality of the balance of forces at the time. And indeed, in this regard, the Communist Party of South Africa, whilst retaining its full independence, should contribute to the work of this organization, broaden the scope of the ANC activities, and in particular with a view of transforming the ANC into a nationalist revolutionary organization capable of building a strong defense against capitalist and British imperialists. That was a task. By 1962, at the SACP's Congress, it adopted the program, The Road to South African Freedom. where it endorsed the National Democratic Revolution as a remedy or as addressing what did it now coined colonialism of a special type, the CST. This situation gave birth to what was later to be known as the Tripartite Alliance, which was consolidated after the adoption of the Freedom Charter in the 50s. And this Tripartite Alliance, constituted by the ANC, the Confederation of South African Trade Unions at the time, the forerunner of COSATU, and the party. They were also engaging this theory that encompassed the entire national liberation movement at the time. And the ANC, by 1969 until 1991 and 2007, at these various conferences, defined the National Democratic Revolution as a dialectical resolution of class, gender, and national contradictions. For COSATU, the NDR was defined as a natural development bias towards the worker and the poor. Whereas for the party, it saw the NDR's role as championing the defeat of the repressive and colonial regimes and transforming the underlying systemic features of the South African society that continue even today to oppress according to race, gender, and class. So the NDR, the need for the NDR was to remove the political and economic manifestations of the so-called colonialism of a special type or apartheid. The NDR is also the glue that holds the alliance together. And our theory of the revolution as we see it, drawn from the Leninist Marxism, without revolutionary theory, there can be no revolutionary movement. And that's why there's an appreciation for the entire national liberation movement to have anchored its theoretical and other postulations that relate to the South African reality to this important articulation of the National Democratic Revolution. It has been a political and intellectual exercise of various forms and over many years of the thinking surrounding the NDR, and has been since its formulation, as well as significant events and decisions that have influenced the NDR over the years. Whilst colonialism all over the world was creating the need for class alliances among those struggling for national independence, and it is these class alliances that Karl Marx first popularized. If we could take a brief look at, how the theory evolved even in the ANC, and especially towards the later years of the 90s, from 91 at least to 94. The ANC strategy and tactics document adopted at the conference declared that colonialism of a special type was intact, with the basic political, gender, and social and economic relations of oppression and exploitation very much in evidence. This is between the period of 1991 to 1994. And also that such adherence was meaningless if the economy did not undergo fundamental restructuring to better serve the interest of the people and achieve far-reaching reforms in areas of land redistribution, housing, education, and health. And there's an evolution, and you will see the interpretation as the ANC now goes into government. There is a new articulation on these issues. At the Mafikeng Conference in 1997, the 50th National Conference Strategy and Tactics document adopted their declared victory over the apartheid government, and that, I quote, a qualitative element of the NDR has been accomplished. Close quote. The document also revised the objectives of the revolution to focus on the management of capitalism and the contradictions that arise from there. It said, the creation of a new society will not eliminate basic antagonisms between capital and labor. Neither will it eradicate the disparate and sometimes contradictory interests that some of the motive forces of the NDR pursue, close quote. And this is a strategy and tactics document of the ANC by 1997. This is the period in which the ANC...
Sorry, Comrade Chris, I'm just intervening. I'm ever so sorry. Could I just ask you if you could conclude in about 2 to 3 minutes, please?
Can I do what?
Could you bring the remarks to a conclusion in 2 to 3 minutes, because of the programme we have a number of speakers.
Oh yes.
Sorry,
oh, yes.
Thank you so much.
No, that's fine.
Sorry.
No, it's okay, it's okay. The point that we're making is that since the ANC has been in government, there's been a rearticulation of the NDR, and this has brought about strategic and tactical differences between the left forces in the alliance and others in the African National Congress. And that's why the factional play-outs that are happening today are part of that, but also a part of an objective development of the strategy of the ANC. And because much of the economic and other important aspirations of national democratic revolution or national aspirations have not been realized. And that for us, as a party said, its 14th Congress is an important task for the party, which is building hegemony in all key states of power, building a popular front, and building a left front to harness the widest possible forces to advance the struggle towards building an alternative society to the rapacious capitalist system. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Comrade Liz.
Thank you very much, Comrade Chris, and I'm so sorry that I intervened at the very end. That was a really great contribution, and really thank you for joining us. I'm now going to go to the Progressive Party of Working People, ACEL, and over now to Vera Policarpo, who, as I said before, has stepped in with literally minutes warning to make a presentation to us. So Vera is head of the International and European Affairs Department of the Central Committee of ACEL. A huge international experience and will be very well known to many of you. Thank you very much, Vera, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, dear Liz. Thank you very much, comrades. Thank you to the comrades of TUDEC for this kind invitation. And it was great listening to Professor Abrahamian's expose, because it was really an insight that was very helpful to us as well. I have to say that I could draw a lot of parallels in the development of our parties, I mean of Tudeh and Akel, from the point of view of the role in building the trade unions, in the position on religion, and that this is a private issue of individual belief. In actual fact, Akel has a lot of believers in its ranks. So it's not a cause of problem, has never been one in Cyprus, much more because, as you might know, in Cyprus, we have 5 communities, the 2 major ones, the Greek Cypriot and the Turkish Cypriot. And then we have 3 smaller ones, which are called religious minorities, Maronites, Armenians, and Latins. So when Akel was founded in 1926 as the Communist Party of Cyprus, was a party of all Cypriots, irrespective of national background, religious background, or linguistic background. So these issues have helped the Communist Party of Cyprus, and from 1941 onwards, Akel, as the Progressive Party of the working people, to build all these fronts and on different levels, and understanding the need of having unity at different levels. I have to recall here that Cyprus was a British colony right up to 1960. Up to 1960. So when Akel was founded, was established, when the Communist Party of Cyprus was established, Cyprus was a colony. So the work of Akel was at the same time building fronts and unity among Cypriots in order to free Cyprus, to get rid of the British colonial regime. And on the other hand was a unity, building fronts and unity for the workers, for the working people. And at the beginning, the workers as such were not many, because Cyprus was basically agrarian, based on agricultural economy. But as time went by, there was more and more people working in different kind of light industries, in ports, in transportation, etc. So there were more and more unions that were trade unions that were founded, and it was the communists that were at the basis of that, mainly in the 30s, and right in the 40s, the first federation was founded. And in this work, the Greek Cypriots and the Turkish Cypriots worked together. And this is the roots of a very important link that Akel, as a party of all Cypriots, not just Greek Cypriots, has the access to the population as a whole, has an understanding of all the problems of all Cypriots. So going through history, and I just have to interlink the 2 things, that is the 2 lines of building unity and of building common fronts. In the 40s, we had 2 very big strikes of the miners and the construction workers. And again, it was the Greek Cypriots and the Turkish Cypriots together. And that was the foundation of a very strong movement, labor movement, that exists until today, with all the weaknesses that we have had in the last decades because of different changes in the economy and the attacks that we have had on labor rights. But still, the main common work that is done today, despite the separation of Cyprus, the division of Cyprus, because of the coup d'etat in 1974 and Turkish invasion that followed, and the occupation that we still have of 37% of our island, the main connection is between the trade unions of the left. And I want you to keep that, because this is an important part of what we do. The second part that I would like to mention in this is that AKEL was always in favor of having a broad political mass struggle in order to overthrow the British colonialism, to do away from British colonialism, because Cyprus is a very small island. It is an island, so there's no way of bringing strength from outside, and with a very small population. Nowadays, we are less than 1 million. So you can imagine back in the 50s, we were 500,000. And there was no way of really getting rid of the British colonialism otherwise than a broad mass political struggle united of Greek Cypriots and Turkish Cypriots. This did not prosper because the right wing and almost nationalist and fascist forces that existed did not allow this to happen. They started an armed struggle, which ended up in agreements, the London and Zurich agreements, giving Cyprus a curtailed independence with 2 British bases, etc., that we suffer the consequences of to this day. So all these years, AKEL learned from experience how to work with broad strata of the population, be it for labor rights, for social rights, for living conditions, for their village, or for the freedom of Cyprus. Then we had to fight to resist the fascist forces, the extreme right-wing forces that wanted to overthrow President Makarios, which eventually they did in 1974. And it was AKEL and the left that were there to defend as much as possible democracy, the republic, and then to defend Cyprus against the Turkish invasion. There was a broad front that was consequently formed in order to support the situation in Cyprus after the 1974 and the division, the occupation. And this was what we called the democratic progressive forces that encompassed from the Democratic Party in the center, the Socialist Party and ourselves. This over the years worked, it elected presidents twice, but then it didn't always work. It was coincidental at times. At times it was only in parliament, not necessarily supporting the president together. But we have tried always to work together on issues, and where possible to have programs. This has not always worked, but we have a lot of experience out of this. Nowadays, what we face is a right-wing government, a very dangerous situation that is leading Cyprus, as we evaluated in our last Congress and the Political Bureau Central Committee a couple of months ago, that we face imminent division, final division of our island. Whilst we are fighting for a reunification of our people and country under a bizonal, bicommunal federation with political equality, as this is explained by the UN. And in this, we envisage where all Cypriots, irrespective of origin, would have their human rights and freedoms guaranteed. So, in order to, and you might, and just another point, which is a shame for us, is you must have heard that President Anastasiadis, unfortunately, is mentioned again in these infamous, notorious Pandora papers. I mean, rather he is infamous and notorious, not the papers, but the mentions there, unfortunately, this is not the first time. And the European Parliament just voted on a resolution on Thursday which mentions him in name. So for all reasons, that is for the future of Cyprus, in order to overcome this corruption that is inherent in his government, we need again to unite as broad as possible forces in order to bring about a change in the presidential elections in February 2023. This is not an easy game at all. We're working on this. We are trying to build connections and links and understanding with different parties and forces and with as far left movements as possible. We are having different mobilizations, like on the 30th of October, we just announced a mobilization against corruption, against the president, and calling for his resignation. We work on environment because there are a lot of forces, and we are part of this environmental movement. On labor issues, on youth issues, we are trying to build different fronts and unity on different levels, and build understanding on what we can have understanding with these forces. It doesn't mean that we all have to agree on everything, and it doesn't mean that we will all lead things to the end together. And the other front, again, which I'm not forgetting, is the common front between Turkish Cypriots and Greek Cypriots. And I'm going to end up with this because this is, we see no future of Cyprus without a common understanding and the common struggle of Turkish Cypriots and Greek Cypriots. The Turkish Cypriots face a very difficult situation. They are the ones that live under occupation. There is more and more influx of settlers from Turkey, which is a crime, a war crime, as you know. There is a very intense attempt of Islamization by Erdogan's forces and AKP, and buying everything out of the hands of the Turkish Cypriots. So they face a very difficult situation of assimilation by Turkey. And if we don't have a solution very fast, we might not have Turkish Cypriots to solve the problem with and to reunite our country. So for Raquel, common fronts are on different levels, and I hope I managed to give you this perspective and be helpful in this debate. Thank you very much, and congratulations again to DEG for the 80th anniversary. Thank you very much.
Comrade Vera, thank you very, very much. That was a fantastic contribution, and especially as you put it together in so very few minutes. We're really, really grateful that you could contribute. And I know that when we come to the discussion section, there will be lots and lots of questions for you, and another opportunity to come in. Thank you very much. We're going to move now to our second musical interlude from our young pianist, Sarah, and she's going to play a piece on the piano. It will be just over 4 minutes long, and then we're going to move into our third session, and we're going to hear speeches from the Communist parties of Iraq, Lebanon, Sudan, and the Communist Party of India Marxist, in that order. So if those speakers could prepare to speak in that order, that would be great. So we're going to hear from Sarah again. Thank you. Thank you very much, Sarah. It's absolutely delightful playing. What a absolute pleasure to listen to. Thank you so much. We're now going to move into speeches, as I heard, from communist parties of Iraq, Lebanon, Sudan, and the Communist Party of India, Marxist. I'd like to first of all bring in, if I can, please, Comrade Salam Ali, who is a member of the Central Committee of the Iraqi Communist Party from 1997, and who is responsible for international relations. You're very welcome, Comrade Salam. We're really glad you could be here. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Comrade Liz. Dear comrades, let me first of all, on behalf of Iraqi communists, salute once again the members and supporters of the Fraternal Tudeh Party on the 80th anniversary of its foundation, and wishing them all the success in their relentless struggle for freedom, peace, democracy, and social progress. And warm greetings also to the comrades from the fraternal parties participating in the panel of speakers. We also express high appreciation for the initiative to organize this seminar, which provides a platform for exchanging ideas and valuable experience of fraternal parties on the topical issue of communists and social movements. I'll begin this contribution by highlighting some important aspects of this issue. According to the Marxist approach, social movements are mass action that arises, that's generally speaking, of course, arises as a result of the class struggle and the conflict of material interests, economic and social, and is aimed at achieving change. And in this sense, a Marxist approach views social movements as ones that emerge as a result of harsh economic social conditions that force a class to unify its ranks behind a vanguard that believes in change and is determined to carry it out to improve the economic situation and achieve social progress for all the members of this movement. And based on this idea of change, the activity of social movements implies striving to change the economic base and the superstructure of society, thus bringing about a new balance of forces and new forms of property and power. And it's worth mentioning here that the concept of social movements has had various definitions by social scientists, and many of them have ignored the way in which capitalism shapes these movements. And it's crucial, this is crucial for understanding them because of a variety of causal mechanisms. Capitalist institutions are often the source or target of popular grievances, especially, but not only during times of economic crisis. So studies of social movements in recent decades not only lacked an anti-capitalist approach, but also largely ignored the enabling and constraining effects of capitalism. And therefore, it's very important to pay greater attention to the dynamics of capitalism, whether at the local, national, or global level, when studying social movements. Economic capitalist globalization, for example, has catalyzed protest in recent years. The common justification for the neglect of political economy in studies of social movements is sometimes the claim that most social movements, for example, for peace, women's rights, gender, against racial discrimination, on environmental issues, etc., are not about class or materialist concerns, and thus have no discernible connection to capitalism. But the example of the civil rights movement in the US clearly demonstrated that ethnic or racial and other non-class-based movements may powerfully be shaped by political and economic factors, and the same applies to movements defending women's rights. On the other side, on the left and communists, there is often a dismissive attitude towards these new social movements as left or characterized as left libertarian. Experience has shown the need for the left and especially communists to engage with these movements, highlighting their crucial role, communists, in providing political guidance and leadership. It's a major task for communists in such popular movements to inject political consciousness and organization, which are indispensable in the fight against repressive regimes and for radical change. Time and again, the lack of political leadership has proved to be a fatal weakness for popular uprisings, opening the door to counter-revolution and internal divisions. It's important for communists to be proactive, not only reacting to events and emerging social movements. This requires taking well-planned initiatives, helping to evolve more effective and advanced forms of organization, and developing political strategies and a clear vision for change. It's a big challenge, of course, without guaranteed success, but will be of enormous importance to develop these movements, inject class consciousness and political awareness. Such a proactive approach will also enhance the status of communists and their parties in these social movements, and also in society and political life. In the remaining time, I will briefly provide insight into the October uprising in Iraq in 2019. And I also point out, that before that, a year before that, there was the popular uprising in Sudan in December 2018, and it was followed soon afterwards in Lebanon by a popular uprising in 17th of October 2019. Now, the aftershocks of the October uprising in Iraq continue to reverberate until the present day. It was a courageous popular uprising that constitutes one of the most important developments in Iraq's modern history since its foundation in 1921. It shook the foundations of the corrupt political system, the ethno-sectarian power-sharing system that was installed after the US invasion and occupation of Iraq in 2003. The eruption of the uprising on the 1st of October 2019, after a massacre committed by security forces against young peaceful protesters, came against a background of a deepening, all-encompassing structural crisis on political, economic, and social levels. The essence of the crisis lies in the policies pursued by an oligarchy, representing the interests of parasitic, bureaucratic, and comprador strata, pursuing new liberal policies under rentier state capitalism. Rampant corruption and plundering public money have been endemic features of this political system. And it's important to mention here that young people under 30 years old constitute 60% of the population. And despite being an oil-rich country, more than 25% of the population, numbering 40 million, are under the poverty line. Mass demonstrations and sit-ins were met with bloody repression, resulting in more than 700 protesters killed and more than 30,000 injured within few weeks, actually within less than 3 months. It demonstrated the burning desire of the people, especially the youth, for change and getting rid of the existing corrupt and sectarian political system. And communists joined the uprising and played an active role. 7 young cadres of our party were martyred. Participants in the movement and those supporting it numbered in millions. Students took to the streets on a scale unprecedented for decades in Iraq. There was also a prominent role of women, as well as unions and professional institutions. If I have time, I just want to mention briefly the fact that the marginalized strata, and that's an important point, constituted a big majority of the social base of the uprising, unlike previous protests since 2011, with the participation mainly of middle strata and intelligentsia and so forth. And this posed actually an enormous challenge, both politically and organizationally. The party, along with civil democratic forces, has strived to develop collective leadership frameworks and also flexible mechanisms actually for this leadership. A lot of the effort has been put into raising political awareness and vigilance against the schemes of the regime and militias. It's important to point out that one of the outcomes of the uprising is that it has raised the political consciousness of millions of young people. And as Lenin said once, there are decades where nothing happens, and there are weeks where decades happen. The uprising was, in its essence, a class struggle waged by poor and toiling classes and strata in defense of their interests, expressing a burning desire for change and building the alternative, which we are fighting for, a civil, democratic state based on social justice. The recent elections on the 10th of October, with the lowest turnout in Iraq's history, have clearly demonstrated the level of popular anger and rejection of the corrupt system, as well as their aspirations for radical change. They voted by their feet. It has provided further evidence that the political center of gravity has now shifted to mass popular struggles for change. The factors, we believe that firmly, the factors that triggered the uprising on the 1st of October 2019 in Iraq continue to exist today. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Comrade Salam. Thank you. Thank you very much. I want to move now to Lebanon, to the Communist Party of Lebanon, and we're being joined today by Dr. Mufid Qutaish, who is a member of the leadership of the Communist Party of Lebanon, and he is Professor of Political Economy at the Lebanese University. You are very, very welcome, Comrade Mufid, and we are very, very glad that it's been possible to connect with you in Lebanon today. Thank you. I think you're muted, Comrade.
Okay.
There we are. I
Okay.
can hear you now.
Thank you, Comrade Liz. Dear comrades, on behalf of the leadership of the Lebanese Communist Party, I would like to thank comrades from the Tuda Party of Iran for the invitation to this webinar and to congratulate them on the occasion of the 80th anniversary of the party foundation. As well, I'd like to greet all comrades participants in the webinar. Today, I'll present the Lebanese Communist Party's vision of the National Democratic Revolution that was and still remains in the center of our attention in the 12th Congress of our party nowadays, and especially in the occasion of the impasse of the Lebanese regime. The National Democratic Revolution, in our Marxist-Leninist understanding, is the revolutionary process aimed to achieve the tasks of national liberation and social democratic progress. The national aspect of this revolution lies in the removal of imperialist political, economic, and military control, direct and indirect. That is the establishment of a national authority that is an alternative to the imperialist authority and the authority of its agents in Lebanon. This also includes liberating the Lebanese economy and its productive forces from imperialist monopolies, achieving economic and social development, and building a material base for the independent national development. The democratic aspect of this process concerns the liquidation of the pre-capitalist production relations and the social structures associated with them as a material base for the imperialist domination and dependency. Today, we are preparing the 12th Congress of our party and experiencing the global change and the rise of the doubt of the validity of Marxism. In this relation, the Lebanese Communist Party finds it at its duty to prove the actuality of Marxism and its ability to find viable solutions to the problems of societies nowadays. Our party is set to apply the ideas of Marxism-Leninism to the concrete economic, political, and social realities of Lebanon. During its development, capitalism resulted in the formation of a double structure in global capitalism. First, the imperialist structure developed as a dominant component of the global capitalism. Second, dependent capitalism appeared as a subordinate and submissive structure of the imperialist one. Based on this perspective, we have to formulate a clear-cut transmission mechanism from this dependent capitalist structure to socialism based on the concept of national liberation. At present, the party's task is to prove that this perspective is the only right and reliable one. It is the result of the fact that it has been impossible to achieve the necessary development of our country within the dependent capitalist society structure. In this relation, our party is accomplishing this task by means of formulating its vision to the national liberation process, which is viewed as a distinctive path to transition to socialism on the base of Marxism-Leninism. The legitimacy of the idea of national liberation is based on the fact that our Arab countries continue to be the subject of colonial domination and dependency. This dependency led to the formation of a production relation between two structures within a global capitalism, the dominant world imperial structure and the dependent capitalist structure. It is resulted in a double exploitation of our peoples that was implemented through the confiscation of the natural and the human resources and the surplus product that is supposed to be the source of capital accumulation in our countries. Moreover, the unequal, dependent, and mutual intertwined relation between the two structures of the capitalist system has been reinforced since then. In other words, the tendency of the external expansion of imperialism became an urgent need to its existence, and while the dependency of the dependent countries became a basic source of their life and a condition of their existence. The economic domination based on dependent capital's production relations in our countries is the material base for the political and military control of the imperialist centers. It is believed that dependency is the major reason of the underdevelopment of our country. Therefore, the liquidation of its underdevelopment is contingent on cutting this dependency and its conditions, such as the structure of the dependent capitalist relation of production, the dependent political systems that protect the existing social structure, colonial policies and practices towards dependent countries, and the Zionist entity that ensure the continuity of dependency in our region. From this point of view, the elimination of the dependency takes the shape of the process of national liberation that is in turn a distinct form of class struggle in our country. Its main goal are to liberate the blocked productive forces by changing the nature of production relations and to treat all dependency conditions. Thus, it becomes clear that the two major tasks of social liberation and national liberation are two mutual intertwined tasks that ensure transition to socialism. By definition, national liberation is a long process of transforming the relations of production of dependent capitalism into socialist relations of production. Therefore, it is on the one hand class struggle against the colonial bourgeoisie, and on the other hand, it is a class struggle against the imperialist bourgeoisie. The struggle in our country acquires the character of national struggle. Up till present time, the process of Arab national liberation has failed to achieve considerable results because of the fact that it was led by the old and the modern colonial bourgeoisie. To ensure the genuine national liberation of our country, the struggle should be led by an alliance of the working class and its allies. However, at present, this historical necessity is incompatible with the condition of the Arab working class for a number of reasons. Therefore, communist parties in the Arab revolutionary forces have to assist to transform the Arab working class into the leader of national liberation movement. Apparently, the working class alone cannot accomplish these complex historical tasks of the national democratic revolution. Therefore, it is a must to establish the class alliance necessary to carry out these tasks at every stage of the struggle. This struggle is characterized by a number of periods in which class struggle would solve different concrete tasks. We can identify three main stages in the national liberation process in Lebanon. The first stage is the stage of the general democratic struggle, in which the main task is to liberate the working masses from their dependence of the dominant class alliance. The second stage is the stage of building of the national democratic government and making a revolutionary transformation of the political system. This stage also entails the realization of deep socio-economic and political reforms by means of reducing the monopoly capitalist model, strengthening the social character of the production, and reducing the consequences of the capital accumulation on the working people, and introducing economic planning and encouraging cooperative activity. In fact, the alternative of monopoly and the private capitalism is the state capitalism, which is socially oriented by the definition of Lenin. that its capitalist character has been reduced to a minimum. The third stage is the stage of building of socialism. The Lebanese Communist Party considers that the establishment of the socialist system in Lebanon is the radical and final solution to the economic, social, and political crisis, and the elimination of human exploitation of man and all kinds of alienation in the country. However, the national liberation movement in the Arab countries, including Lebanon, is witnessing deep crisis resulting from the fact that the colonial bourgeoisie and later the petty bourgeoisie have occupied the leading position in this movement. Hence, the main demand for the revival of the national liberation process is to build a new liberal movement with new liberation movement with its program and its leadership. The Arab communist and leftist parties should shoulder this historical responsibility in order to accomplish this task. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, comrade. Thank you. We're really, really glad that, that the electricity has held up and everything with your connection. That was fantastic. Thank you so much. And we'll be able to come back to you, we hope, in the discussion section. I'm moving now to the Communist Party of Sudan. And I'd like to welcome Comrade Fathi Al-Fadl, who is the spokesperson of the Sudanese Communist Party and a member of its Politburo. He's the former Secretary General of the International Union of Students and is currently one of the Vice Presidents of the International Centre for Trade Union Rights, ICTOR. He's respected and long-time independent activist for labour rights in Sudan. It's a great pleasure to have you. We're really glad that you could be here, comrade, and the floor is yours. You need to unmute, comrade.
Thank you, comrade. It's a great pleasure for the Sudanese Communist Party to participate at this seminar on the occasion of the 80th anniversary of the Tuda Party. On this occasion, we once again send our congratulations to the Tuda Party as well as to all the democratic and patriotic forces in Iran. As you are probably aware, there is quite big similarities between the situation in Sudan and Iran, at least before the successful conclusion or the successful movement of the December 2019. We share the troubles and the problems faced by Tuda, and at the same time, we enjoy very much the solidarity expressed by Tuda to our party and the action also taken by the international communist movement in support of the struggle of the Sudanese people. However, at this juncture, we once more reiterate the position of the Sudanese Communist Party in support of the struggle of the Iranian people for democracy, peace, and socialism. We in the Sudanese Communist Party shall deal with two topics. That is the stage of the National Democratic Revolution and the issue related to the United Front. Both topics will be related to our own experience in the strategic alliance as well as the tactical alliances. Since its inception in 1946, the Sudanese Communist Party has paid great attention to the issues and tasks of the National Democratic Revolution. It stressed in its early years the importance of confronting the historical task. This is important because the bourgeois parties, which allied themselves with feudal forces and semi-feudal forces, failed to lead the country towards national liberation. The Sudanese Communist Party considered that the objective conditions were ripe for the emergence of a new social force to organize the Sudanese masses in the struggle for national and social liberation. The Sudanese Communist Party has stressed on the effectiveness and the independent existence of the party, defining its role in the leadership of the productive forces, mainly the working class and the peasantry. During the struggle for independence, this was the role of our party to help organize the working class as well as the peasantry. In 1953, that efforts were successful in the establishment of the General Union of Sudanese Trade Unions. This was a great achievement realized for the first time in the Sudan, creating a united trade union movement around the working class trade unions. The communist workers played a major role in this achievement. This was followed by the establishment of the mass democratic organizations among the peasantry, and then again among the students, youth, and women. All these mass democratic organizations were based on the alliance of communist and patriotic and democratic forces within this movement. The Sudanese revolution have proved that it is national democratic revolution is have an anti-imperialist character, and the fight is basically for democratic rights and liberties, peace, and social progress. The building of the democratic mass organization has helped to confront the problem faced by the Sudanese people. Actually, these democratic organizations, I mean, the Democratic Front for Sudan, for example, the Sudanese Youth Union, the Sudanese Women's Union, were used as channels of communication with the mass movement and helped a lot in developing the broad base of communication with the mass movement while we had some kind of a democratic atmosphere in the country. However, the Sudanese Communist Party considered that the stage through which Sudan is passing since independence till now is the stage of the national democratic revolution. Accordingly, it defined its tasks and programs, the strategic alliance, which is permanent, and the tactical ones, which are subject to changing due to the different phases of the national democratic revolution. At the same time, it is important to define the social forces that can achieve their tasks within the ranks of the National Democratic Front. In our opinion, that the success of this stage is highly dependent on the role of the Communist Party, and since it is supposed to play the leading role in the building of the alliance. Here, it is important also to mention that to play this role, the Communist Party must qualify for that role, must adhere to Marxism-Leninism, and must adhere also to working within the working class in the country, build a broad alliance between the working class, the peasantry, the revolutionary intelligentsia, as well as the young officers and soldiers in the armed forces. Within this context, we think that the Sudanese Communist Party is the working class party, which is keen on expressing and representing the interests of the working class. It is in this context that the task of the communists is to defend, promote, and struggle to realize the working class interests. Doing that will help to raise awareness among the working class to play its role as a leading class of the alliance of the forces within the National Democratic Front. In the nature of this revolutionary stage is reflected in the programs and tasks and its composition of different social forces with different final interests, necessitates different levels of alliance. The alliance within the National Democratic Front is a strategic alliance for the revolutionary stage still reaching socialism. However, the strength of this alliance is based on the role of the Communist Party and the working class, since it has basic interest in the completion of the task of the National Democratic Revolution, and its leadership of the alliance is due to the fact that the working class has a further goal during the National Democratic Revolution till the building of socialism in the Sudan. The SCP is fighting for the establishment to build the national democratic power or authority through mass and peaceful struggle. This authority will follow and implement the principles of social, economic, and cultural interests of its components, while maintaining parliamentary democracy. The National Democratic Front must couple that with the independent initiatives and extra parliamentary actions. The widespread and independent participation of the masses in the decision-making and implementation is another important principle. Adopting and following foreign policy which reflect the interests of the Sudanese people. Also expressing solidarity with the peoples of the world in the struggle against imperialism for democracy, peace, and socialism. On the field of the United Front, this is the tool needed to broaden mass actions and during the political turns and crises. It is realized and organized under the program that reflects the needs and interests of the composing social forces. At the same time, while the goal of the Communist Party is the composition of the task of the National Democratic Revolution and building of socialism, the tactical alliance are aimed at drawing political and social forces to broaden and consolidate the mass base and to open horizons for the success of the National Democratic Revolution. The tactics of establishing the Broad Front has proved successful during the October Revolution of 1964, the April Uprising of 1985, and the December Revolution of 2019. However, as the Broad Alliance is based on a program, that does not mean that the political parties will honor the commitment and the realization of the whole program. Our experience also has shown that the issue of the main contradiction and the secondary contradictions within the Broad Alliance plays a role on how the alliance can develop. Our work within the grassroots levels have forced the leaderships of the traditional bourgeois parties and some of the armed groups to join in the December Revolution. However, soon after the removal of al-Bashir, these groups turned their attention to implement the project of the soft landing, which is also aiming at broadening the social base of the same regime, giving them more participation on the level of the government as well as the state power. This experience has led at the present stage to the disruption and problems within the forces for freedom and change, and which has forced the Communist Party last November to withdraw from this organization, and expressing also the difficulties in continuing within the organization. Our experiences have shown that while trying that during the October Revolution and the April Uprising, that the organized trade union movement played a major role in toppling the two dictatorships. However, their absence during the preparation for and the mobilization and organization of the masses during the December Revolution necessitated different tactics. And here we must say that the party turned to the organization and building of the resistance committees in the residential area, workplaces, and educational institutions. The resistance committees have played the major mass role in the limited success achieved by the December Revolution. However, today, the broad front, which is a major goal for us, is building, must take into consideration the past experience during the last 2 years, that the emergence of new or energized force, the resistance committees, as well as the slow but growing building of the trade unions, will help to establish a new alliance in the country. This is the basic goal for our struggle at the present. Probably you have heard about the recent developments, the problem in the military component and the civil component. However, we feel that both components do not have a big difference within the policy, because be it on the economic level or concerning the peace in Darfur or foreign policy, the two components agree on that. However, at the present stage, the main contradiction is around the authority. Who will be the leader within this so-called shared partnership? For the party, it is important for the continuation of the revolution to establish a complete national civilian authority in the country. And for this, we are fighting and preparing for change in our country. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Comrade Fatou. We are now going to move to the Communist Party of India Marxist and to its General Secretary, Sitaram Yechury. Sitaram was the All India President of the Students' Federation of India, the largest student organisation in the country. He is a member of the Central Committee of the party from 1984, from its Politburo from 1992. He was a member of the upper house of the Indian Parliament from 2005 to 2017, and he was elected the General Secretary of the CPIM at its 21st Congress in 2015. Prior to that, he was head of the international department of the party for more than 2 decades. Comrade Sitaram is in a meeting of the Central Committee of the Communist Party of India Marxist exactly at this time. And so we have a recording of his contribution, and we're going over to hear Sitaram now. Thank you very much.
My greetings to the Tudeh Party of Iran on its 80th anniversary. In fact, the working class movement and the movement of the oppressed people in Iran goes back to a century, almost at the same time that the communist parties were formed in various countries of Asia. It was in 1920 September that the Communist Party of India was founded in Tashkent because under British rule, the communists were exiled and we couldn't function within India. In 1921, you had the formation of the Communist Party of China. Likewise, in many countries, including in Iran, the working class started grouping itself under the influence of the Great October Socialist Revolution and the impact of Lenin and the Russian Revolution. Now, Tudeh Party continues with that legacy for nearly a century now, and today, in its 80th anniversary, it has gone through a very, very turbulent history. Many of us have gone through our own histories. We had our own divisions, we had our own differences, but the Tudeh Party and the people of Iran were subjected to much more severe repression. And this was primarily because Iran was also the playfield of global imperialism. The oil in Iran was the sore point for which control over Iran was necessary political control. And when, under the influence of the Iranian people's upsurge and struggle, Mohammad Mossadegh nationalized oil in Iran, then you saw the counter-revolution and the forces with direct imperialist intervention and CIA intervention move in order to oust that regime, impose their puppet regime, which unleashed severe repression against the left, against the people, against the country. But the Tudeh party had to take the brunt of this attack. Today, in spite of all these turbulations, in spite of all this repression, the Tudeh party in these 80 years has been steadfast in its commitment to Marxism-Leninism, in its commitment to the communist principles, and its commitment in order to create a progressive, non-exploitative society in Iran and move towards socialism and communism. For this consistency, steadfastness, commitment, and the dedication and the sacrifices of innumerable martyrs of our Iranian communists, on behalf of the Communist Party of India Marxist, I would convey my salute to all of you and to the Tudeh party on this occasion. The CPIM and the Tudeh party have had very close fraternal relations for many, many decades now. And this goes back not only in terms of expressing our solidarity in terms of resolutions, but also in joint actions and the support that we all gave for the Iranian struggle, and particularly against the Shah of Iran. I personally was involved in one of the demonstrations when the Shah came here on a state visit. And we protected and kept in our university then a large number of our Iranian students, friends, comrades, and so that they are not deported before the Shah's visit, which was the idea of the then Indian government. So it is also a bond of common struggles between us. And I'm so happy and glad that on this occasion, this medium is being used to discuss certain very important issues concerning the communist movement in the world and the communist parties in particular. I've been asked in this webinar, which is titled on the theme of communists and social movements, to focus on the communists and the National Democratic Revolution or the People's Democratic Revolution. We in India, the CPIM, we define it as the People's Democratic Revolution, which according to us is the second stage of the Indian Revolution, the first having been our gaining independence from the British rule, from British colonialism. But the stages of revolution is a concept, I think, that merits a relook and an understanding in order to strengthen it. It is absolutely imperative that we realize the importance that Lenin taught us, that there are no shortcuts towards socialism and communism. It has to be built stage by stage, and to reach there, both in terms of the economic base of the society and the consciousness of the people who are prepared for a socialist revolution. Both will have to be considered and taken into account, which means going back to the inviolable Leninist principle of concrete analysis of concrete conditions is the living essence of dialectics. This concrete analysis of concrete conditions is on the basis of which the concept of stages of revolution evolved. And it was natural that this had to evolve because of the history of the revolutionary movement in the world. Marx and Engels, when they gave us the Communist Manifesto, they gave us an understanding that the transition from capitalism to socialism will begin from the most advanced capitalist countries, because they've reached the stage of productive forces, which now need to be liberated from the confines of the capitalist social relations, and that is the stage for a socialist revolution. But then, one law of capitalism that Marx identified and gave all of us, that as capitalism develops, there is an increase in the concentration of capital, and this concentration of capital will lead to monopoly capitalism. This process of accumulation of capital, the concentration of capital, leading to the stage of imperialism was Lenin's seminal contribution to Marxism. That is why it is Marxism-Leninism. And under imperialism, when the whole world is brought under the chain of imperialism, the possibilities of breaking it at its weakest link arise. That is, the possibilities of moving towards socialism arise even in countries that are not yet fully and completely capitalistically developed. And that is when the stages of the revolution become important. From a backward, non-capitalist or a semi-feudal or even a capitalist but less developed capitalist economy to move towards socialism, like Russia was at that point of time when the Russian Revolution took place, you'd require to go through various phases to augment and increase the level of productive forces to the level where it's possible to transit towards socialism. It is in this process that the stages concept arose, and very rightly, unless we go through these stages, we will not be in a position, or no communist movement will be in a position in their countries to really succeed in the socialist revolution. Now, this was a very important concept, remains an important concept, but is also beset with a lot of conflicts that arise in the process of how this people's democratic revolution can be achieved when the former colonies became independent and set about the task of building a people's democratic society in their countries as the prelude to move towards socialism. And here there were various theories and concepts that arose, for which both the Ture Party and the Communist Party of India Marxist were also party to it, and we had to go through these struggles within our own countries. That is, there was a stage where a concept that came up saying that in the post-Second World War period, last century, that it's possible to bypass the stage of capitalism and move from a semi-feudal or from a backward economy and society towards socialism, bypassing the stage of capitalism. Now, this is something in hindsight has proven to be extremely erroneous. Even countries that succeeded in their socialist revolution had to go through, subsequently learn from their own experience, and go through process of reforms in order to increase the productive forces. That is precisely the essence of the reforms under Deng Xiaoping that came in China, and the result of that is there for all of us. That was, in essence, the reason for Lenin advocating the new economic policy then of wanting to build productive forces in a rapid manner so that you can consolidate socialism. So the building the growth, development of productive forces, that is an essential key element in deciding on the stages of the revolution. And secondly, having entered the second stage, as far as we are concerned in India after independence, the important thing is to identify who is actually the ruling classes in independent countries or former colonies. And there, the different assessments led to unfortunate divisions within the communist movement. We, for one, the Communist Party of India Marxist, we characterize the Indian state, the ruling classes in India, as a bourgeois landlord coalition led by the big bourgeoisie that is increasingly collaborating with international finance capital. Now, this over a period of time has proved right in practice and correct, which is why the CPIM emerged as the largest communist force in India. We were just a small group when we took this understanding and started a different party in 1964. There was an understanding that Indian ruling classes were progressive bourgeoisie or a nationalist bourgeoisie, and they are going to build a nationalist alternative, which is not capitalism, and therefore bypassing the stage of capitalism possible to go towards socialism. That had the support of a major socialist communist party in the world, the Soviet Union then, and then you had one division in the communist movement. Then you had the other who characterized Indian ruling classes as a comprador class. All that is required is to arm the people and have a people's war or a people's revolution and it's easy to overthrow and move towards socialism. And that led to another split. So the three-way split in the Indian Communist movement is unfortunate experience for us, but these, I think, are inevitable in many countries. These have happened in many countries in our region. But this ideological steadfastness on the question of a concrete analysis of concrete conditions, and on that basis defining the stage of the people's democratic revolution and the leadership to achieve that. A nebulous sharing of the leadership between the bourgeoisie or the national bourgeoisie and the working class is something that our experience has taught us, and we have rejected, and we will never adhere to that position. As far as we are concerned, the people's democratic revolution can only succeed under the leadership of the working class when all the other exploited classes are united and brought under a class coalition, which is the People's Democratic Front. And it is this People's Democratic Front that would have to build its the Workers' Peasant Alliance, and on that basis, strength of the Workers' Peasant Alliance to unite in struggles the most exploited classes in the society, and at least in India, these most exploited classes are the working class, the Indian peasantry, particularly the small peasantry, and the agricultural labor. It is the unity in struggles, which is the sharpening of class struggles, on the basis of this core, which will define the class unity required for the People's Democratic Front, which, under the leadership of the working class, will lead the People's Democratic Revolution. And this is all happening in the background and the context to very dangerous developments that are taking place in India today. You have a global rightward shift that is taking place following the 2008, the global financial meltdown. And after the COVID pandemic, this has become even more sharply seen, whereby the whole effort is to today try and suppress or divert the growing discontent of the people against the inability of neoliberalism to provide an alternative or provide a solution to the economic crisis that it itself has created. Neoliberalism's bankruptcy is obviously seen all over, but yet that trajectory is continued in order to maximize profits, which means maximize exploitation of the people. The struggles of the working people against this exploitation, which are bursting out in many parts of the world, if they have to be controlled, then the people have to be diverted into disruptive channels based on emotive slogans on the basis of racism, xenophobia, and in countries like in India, what we call communalism, or on religious tensions between different religious communities. And we have that seen in some other countries in terms of ethnic communities. That is, divide the people in these terms of ethnic conflicts, religious conflicts, or conflicts on the basis of race, on the conflict on the basis of color of your skin. And that movement towards a rightist political shift is giving rise to many neo-fascist forces across the world. So that is part of this overall package to sustain neoliberalism. It is our task in this background to actually unite, the task of the communists, to actually unite the most exploited sections, which will form the core of the class unity required for the People's Democratic Front, which will lead the People's Democratic Revolution under the leadership of the working class through strengthening the Worker-Peasant Alliance. So this, in a nutshell, is how we are now trying to carry forward the revolutionary movement in India. But as I mentioned earlier, finally, I would only like to say that the inviolable principle of either identifying the stages, what is the character of that stage, what is the strategy that is required for completion of that stage, and what is the nature of the revolution. How the revolutionary form will take place, whether it will be through through violence, peaceful, democratic through electoral transition. These are all based on the concrete conditions. And that concrete analysis of concrete conditions is the essence. Iran has its own concrete conditions, and it has been through, as I said in a very nutshell, very, very turbulent times. And particularly after the 1979 Iranian Revolution, there was another wave of attacks from another angle that have come. The people of Iran and the Tudeh party of Iran are today, I repeat, steadfastly committed to upholding Marxism-Leninism and the final, ultimate, noble objective of liberating the human being, or the final liberation of society and the human race. And that is what is the irresistible attraction of Marxism-Leninism, which both of our parties share. And I wish and greet all the parties that are present at this webinar, and particularly at this inaugural session, our comrades from the AKEL, our comrades from the CP of Iraq, our comrades from the CP of Lebanon, comrades from the CP of Sudan, and our comrades from the South African Communist Party, and all others who are either already joined or will join during the course of this webinar. To all of you, our fraternal red salute and our solidarity to strengthen the international communist movement and face the onslaught of imperialism today. Thank you once again. My fraternal greetings and salutes to all of you.
Well, although he can't hear us right at this moment, I want to say a very big thank you to Comrade Sitaram and to the Communist Party of India, Marxist. That was a very, very fitting final contribution, and such a lot to think about, and encapsulating the struggles of all of us. So thank you very much indeed. We're now going to move to our third and final musical interlude, some piano music from Sarah. After that, we will move into a section of questions, answers, discussion. And after we've had the musical interlude and we're back, I'll explain how that's going to run, comrade. So please enjoy Sarah for 2 or 3 minutes. Thank you. Well, thank you again to Sarah for that beautiful music. Can I remind, I haven't been following the chat in the last few minutes, can I remind the technical team if you could put the names of the pieces that Sarah has played into the chat, that would be absolutely great. Thank you. Well, welcome to our comrades, friends and supporters, to all of you across the world who are present in this meeting this afternoon, to our last and final session, which in some senses is the most important because it's the session in which we can talk and discuss, think about contributions that have been made. The speakers will be able to speak with each other, and we have some questions that have come in during the seminar itself. Before we move into that discussion, I would like to particularly welcome to this session. So in addition to the panelists, the speakers that you have already met and listened to this afternoon, I'd like to give a very, very warm and very special welcome to Comrade Mohammed Ahmedvor. Comrade Mohammed is a member of the Politburo. He is the spokesperson and leading member of the Central Committee of the Tudeh Party of Iran, and he is the editor of its central organ, the Name Mardom. He was elected to the Central Committee of the Tudeh Party of Iran at its third Congress in 1991, and he has been confirmed in his role and elected as a member of the Central Committee and the Politburo ever since. In the 1980s, Comrade Mohammed was involved in the leadership of the Tudeh Youth of Iran and the youth organization of the party. So a very, very warm and very special welcome to Comrade Mohammed. We're also being joined by two comrades from Sudan. Comrade Farid Idris is the organizational secretary of the International Bureau of the Communist Party of Sudan. And Ayhab Idris is a member of the leadership of the party organization in the capital Khartoum and a member of the International Relations Bureau. You are very, very welcome. What I would like to do first is to give the speakers and the panelists who have joined an opportunity to ask each other anything that they would like to ask or to make any brief comments. Comrades, I know it's really sad, I did say brief because we have quite a lot of questions from the floor, as it were, to answer also. But I think it's very, very important that we can all hear you share your thoughts on what has happened this afternoon, what you have heard. So if you would like to show me electronically the panelists, the order in which you would like to come in, or perhaps shall I go to Comrade Mohammed first from the Tudeh Party, if there's anything you'd like to say initially, Comrade Mohammed, and then I'll bring everybody else in who has put their raised their electronic hand. Thank you.
Thank you, Comrade Liz, and greetings to all the fraternal comrades who took part in this important webinar. I think this is of extreme importance for our party. As you know, our party is preparing for its 7th Congress, and some of the issues that have been discussed by our comrades, I unfortunately got to the last bit of some of the contribution, but I fortunately can go and look back at all the contributions later on through Facebook and the recordings. But as you know, as part of our work for the 7th Congress, some of the issues that have been raised here have been at the forefront of our work, including how our party views the National Democratic Revolution and what stage of development our society is. We also have a significant document
looking at Marxism-Leninism in the 21st century and what we mean by that, as well as developing our new party program, which significantly again deals with some of the issues raised here, including political Islam and including the situation in the whole Middle East. So I found the discussions, the bits that I attended, extremely helpful, and I am so grateful on behalf of our Central Committee, thanking all the comrades who took the time to participate and help this webinar be of very valuable contribution to the communist movement, not in our region, but all over the world, who are facing some of the similar challenges and issues that we face as well. So thank you for that. I'll come down and let other comrades speak.
Thank you very, very much, Comrade Mohammed. Are there any panelists who would like to come back in at this stage? If you can raise your little yellow hand, that would be good. Or indeed just wave. Okay, in that case, we'll go straight to some of the questions that have been raised from the floor. First of all, this is I think addressed to the Tudor Party comrades and also to Professor Abramian. What influence does the Tudor Party in exile have in contemporary Iran? I know this is a question that that is very, very often asked by comrades across the world. So I don't know who wants to come in first there.
I can start, and perhaps other
fantastic. Thank you.
Could help me. So I think the contribution from our party indicated that following the regime's significant attack on us in 1983, the party faced significant challenges in continuing its struggle. But I think some 38 years later, and despite this continuous attack by the regime security forces, the party has come a long way in establishing itself politically and also organizationally. I think it's fair to say, and we can see this from the responses we get from the allowed media and some of the leaders of the regime, that the party does have a significant political influence in the country's affair, and in terms of some of the slogans and proposals and the programs the party puts forward at this stage for developing the struggle in Iran. And an interesting example would be, Ayatollah Khamenei in one of the sort of recent speeches a few years ago with the students, mentioned to them that I'm worried that again the influence of Marxists and communists are reappearing in the society and especially in universities. And he asked the regime's media to replay those television confessions of the 1980s. Also, I think the latest election, the so-called election in Iran, and the fact that the overwhelming majority of the progressive forces came together under the same banner and as the same effectively sort of policy that our party was proposing in terms of not taking part in these sham elections and calling the people to not take part, which meant that this election was the lowest participating election in Iran's contemporary history after the revolution, shows the party's political influence in Iran, which is important. And I think we will work to increase that significantly, hopefully, over the years to come. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Comrade. I wonder whether Professor Abramian would like to come in on that point. I'm sorry, I didn't want to put you on the spot if you didn't want to, but you might like to comment on that. Okay, I don't think Professor, yes, he's there.
Yes, I think that the role of any exiled group in this condition where it's very difficult to work within Iran is to keep alive, I think, the important ideas of the left. And I think Omidwar just mentioned that Khamenei warned that people shouldn't listen to Marxist works. This shows that there is a real fear that the competition to their ideology is very much still Marxism, not necessarily dogmatic Marxism, but Marxism that appeals to the young generation. And there it goes back to the core of what is leftist ideas, which is protection of individual rights together with social and economic rights. These are rights that the regime hasn't been able to provide and has made, in fact, a mockery of individual rights. So the left has to keep alive those ideas. These are ideas were very much associated with the left in the past for the last century, and it should continue to do that, even if it has to do it from abroad. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much. While we are still with you, as it were, there are two other questions that I think you might be able to help us on. A question specifically addressed to you from someone who describes herself as a young Iranian, and she said, "Hello, Professor, thank you. After reading your book, Iran Between Two Revolutions, I understood that maybe Iran has more religious roots than I thought possible. Do you still see Iran struggling with its complex relation to Islam and religion? Is this as problematic today as at the end of the 19th century? I am asking as a young Iranian, surprised that we were religious at all. I always saw Iran as secular. Is that completely wrong? Thank you."
It's actually a very interesting question and goes to the core of, I think, some of the major problems in Iran. In some ways, the society is secular in that people's religious beliefs were kept personal. It's something you had it yourself. And if you believed in God, that was your relationship with God. And from the beginning of 1900, especially during the Constitutional Revolution, the left progressives always respected religion, but was something to be kept separate from politics. So even if you had people on the left who were personally religious, they didn't bring the religion into politics. And similarly, they expected people who were religious in practice not to bring it into politics. So there was this sort of tacit agreement among liberals, among progressives, leftists, that religion should be respected but kept out. This goes back, I think, to the French Revolution and the ideas of the Enlightenment. And the mistake that came from the Islamic left was to bring in religion very much into politics and to legitimize everything by claiming that this was rooted in their beliefs of religion. And this, of course, I think has led to many of the problems that exist now, not just in Iran, actually through much of the world, including the United States. Religion is not some supermarket. You can go in and pick out the items you want and check it out. It has its own discourse, logic. And once you enter that, you're really going back into pre-Enlightenment notions, even pre-medieval notions of justice, of rights, and what is normal practice in politics. So in some ways, the grappling in Iran that exists now with how to deal with religion is been there actually since 1900. And in some ways, the people who viewed Iran as secular were not wrong in that the majority of people viewed religion as a personal belief, not a political belief. And political Islam has basically misused people's religions. I'll stop there.
Thank you very much indeed, Professor, for that. I next have a question. I've just lost it on my phone screen. I'm very sorry. I've got a question for Comrade Salam Ali from Communist Party of Iraq. And the question is, Comrade, is there any scope for the party to capitalize on the lack of participation in the recent election?
Oh, well, thank you. Well, this is a very important question. And now that the elections are over, and actually I finished my contribution by mentioning that the turnout in the recent elections on the 10th of October was the lowest in Iraq's history. It was much worse than it was in 2018, when the Electoral Commission claimed that 44.5% of the people participated, and then turned out it's no more than 20%. So now the outcome has proved once again that the forces that are in power, these based on the sectarian ethnic power sharing system, are not prepared to relinquish their control over the state. Actually, it has vindicated our party position to boycott these elections. And by the way, I mean, these elections were supposed to be early elections. And early elections was the main demand of the popular uprising, which managed to achieve a big victory in overthrowing the previous government of Adel Abdel Mahdi, that was responsible for committing the massacres or effectively allowing the militias to commit these horrible crimes against peaceful protesters. So it was effectively overthrown peacefully. And it was replaced by a transitional government headed by Kadhimi. And this government actually came about as well as a result of what we say American-Iranian consensus. And that goes to show, I mean, the importance of the external factor in shaping internal Iraqi politics and successive governments. But also the outcome has proved that elections are not the only means for change, for peaceful democratic change. Popular mass struggle and pressure from extra parliamentary struggles, so to speak, are fundamental in this respect. Now, the elections are over, and the top priority for the party now, as well as other civil democratic forces that boycotted the elections, is to bring together all these forces that participated in the uprising. And there is a broad spectrum of that, coordinating committees and movements and so on. The job now is to build a unified front, opposition front, that will also be able to influence the very few members of parliament who are supposedly, independent or supportive of the demands of the uprising. So this is now the challenge and the task facing the party in the coming weeks and months. And also there is now a very tense situation in Baghdad, in other provinces. The political parties with militias who lost in a big way, actually, in the elections, their votes have gone to other blocs, now have decided to come out and challenge the results, and even threatening to resort to arms. And now they have set up, with the support of the Popular Mobilization Forces. This is the sort of, I don't want to draw parallels, but there are similarities with or this is the aim with the Revolutionary Guards in Iran. These are all mainly closely connected to Iran, or certain power centers in Iran, have decided to come out and set up so-called camps or tents near the green zone, threatening the government and the Electoral Commission that if they don't review the outcome of the elections, then there would be a very serious situation. So now you have this polarization, and I think there are big opportunities ahead, and we need to really work hard to bring everybody together, including a minority that took part in the elections, but are very supportive of the demands of the uprising. We should get beyond that and bring unity, as I already mentioned earlier. Thank you. Thank you for that.
Thank you very much, Comrade Salam. Thank you. Now I can see one of our panelists indicating, Comrade Navid Shomali.
Thank you very much, Liz, and thank you very much, comrades, for their comments and remarks up to now. And what I am very surprised is the high value of some of the presentations, detailed presentations, in-depth analysis of a common problem that at least 6-7 of our parties had been engaged with during the last few years, at least. I personally have benefited a lot from all presentations. I would like to ask the panelists whether they have any comment to make that what are the ways, what are the possibilities of ensuring that this exchange of view between our parties about not general issues, but very specific issues. The specific issue, for example, of the dynamics and politics of the National Democratic Revolution. We have seen 4 distinct presentations today. There are a lot of commonalities, but there are a lot of also issues that we might want to engage with and explore. Is there a possibility that we can, as communist parties, working in certain similar situations to work together in a organized fashion? What I mean that every few years to be able, every few months to be able to get together and explore and offer questions and explanation to what is happening in our countries. I would very much hope that the comrades could identify some way forward from this seminar. Thank you very much, comrades.
Thank you very much, Comrade Navid. I wonder whether any of the panelists would like to come in on that, either briefly or a little more fully. Comrade Vera, the floor is yours. You're muted, comrade.
Yeah. Sorry, I couldn't find the yellow finger, so I moved my physical finger. I just wanted to say that it was really it's a great opportunity from which we can all benefit. Definitely, we're going to benefit very much from that, because I'll do my best to convey this information and make more people see the video and listen to a lot of useful insights into your each party's, each country's situation, because as very rightly Comrade Sitaram said, it all depends on the conditions and the specific conditions and how you analyze them. And in response to Comrade Navid's question, I would say that at least we have a lot to benefit from that. As talking about the situation in our specific region, because I would say that at least 4 or 5 of our parties here, we are from the same region here, extended region, and that we are affected and influenced and suffer the consequences of policies which are no longer directed towards one country specifically and only. They are part of an overall strategic planning of the imperialists and of the enemies of our peoples. Hence, the understanding that we can build of what is happening in each of your countries, of our countries in this region, and how your people are affected by this would be very, very useful for all of us. And I would take just one part, which is the militarization. I mean, we are from the Eastern Mediterranean up to Pakistan and India and Afghanistan, and right up to Sudan and Somalia, which is the very broad area. We are suffering from a very big militarization of the area on all kinds of weapons, including nuclear. So to learn of how we're going to wage ahead the people's struggles and how we achieve our objectives, in a way we have to face this huge attack on us, and we should not be diverted from what the goal of all of us is, which is eventually socialism. And this militarization is a huge threat that would kill everything. And we will have no chance without peace to reach these goals that we want to reach. Hence, I would put into this basket of debates that we are very much open to participate in, the need to rally together forces against this militarization and threats and the struggle for peace. Thank you.
Comrade Vera, thank you very, very much indeed. I can see that the 2 other of our panelists would like to come in on this. First of all, Comrade Fatih El Fadl from Sudan, and followed by Comrade Mufid from the Communist Party of Lebanon. Comrade Fatih.
Thank you, Comrade. For sure, we welcome any initiative towards bringing together the parties who have participated in this seminar, discuss issues of mutual concern. As Comrade Vera has been speaking, I mean, there's the danger of militarism, the very dangerous role of Turkey, as far as Iraq is concerned, as far as Cyprus is concerned, and I think as far as Sudan is concerned. There is a number of issues related to this national democratic revolution and the problems which each experience and in each country, how to deal with it, how to see the alliances, and what is the role of the Communist Party within the national democratic revolution and the perspectives of building socialism. I remember in the past there was an initiative of, I think it was the Greek comrades who were organizing an annual meeting for the Communist parties of the Mediterranean, Eastern Mediterranean and the Red Sea, whereby more or less this group of parties were attending. and we're comparing our experiences as well as learning from each other on which way solidarity can be channeled or how to participate in international forum. So in principle, we think we should try to develop concrete ideas related to such meetings, but not to repeat the generalities and themes which are usually discussed in the international meeting of the communist and workers' parties. I think to learn from that and to try as much as possible to have one or two issues which are very concrete and which can relate to the struggles of nearly, if not all the parties, the majority of the parties. And here I think we should try to enlarge a bit the participation, at least to involve, for example, the progressive, democratic, and communist parties of the Gulf area. I especially have in mind the Kuwaiti and the Bahraini comrades. On the other hand, I think it would be very much appreciated if this seminar can also, or the panel of this seminar can develop a few ideas around solidarity, especially with the Palestinian people. I mean, the issue of Palestine is definitely becoming a main concern now, especially with the new Israeli government and the new tendencies within a number of the Arab countries to normalize relations with Israel. This is a challenge to all of us, and a challenge especially to those living in these countries, including my country. I think such issues, it can be discussed. Solidarity is one issue, but it's still the responsibility of the communist parties and their role in the national democratic revolution. I think this would be very enlightening to all us if the experience is being exposed of each party, and at least you can see the general and common features of the struggle in that sense. Thank you.
Thank you very much, comrade. Can we now go to Comrade Mufid in Lebanon, please? Thank you.
Thank you. On Comrade Navid's remark, I will somewhat repeat Comrade Fathi. Comrade Navid and Comrade Chris in Izmir, I proposed there to organize a political framework for the communist and leftist parties from Asia, Africa, and Latin America, because of the similarity of the problems, tasks, and the conditions of living and struggling there. So it will be similar to the meeting of the communist parties, but the subject will be more limited with our problems and conditions on these continents. So I would like that comrades from these parties to think about this proposal.
Okay. Thank you very much, comrade. And I'm bringing in now Comrade Salam Ali. Comrade.
Thank you, comrade. I think this idea of bringing together fraternal parties, I mean, on specific issues is very, very useful. And I think we need to think of a sort of a flexible format, not a very sort of formal, rigid format like, you know, these international meetings, whatever, although they're very useful and important, of course. But I think something which we were sort of brainstorming can take place, and an exchange of experiences without you know, prepared text, whatever. I think, and also, if possible, depends on the topic as well. Maybe you can also invite an expert in the field, somebody like of the caliber of Professor Ervand Abrahamian, I think, who made a very useful contribution to this meeting. I think we need to think about that as well. And so we can have a sort of a list of priorities, topics that are quite urgent and immediate. I mean, like the one which Comrade Vera raised, I mean, about militarization in the Middle East and issues of solidarity like that with the Palestinian people, uprisings, and also to bring together the other forces which are part of the movement in the Gulf, a very sensitive area as well. I mean, I think it's about time really to listen and to learn more about the fight that is going on in these, although very small Gulf states, but very important players in the area as well. So we need to do that. Africa as well, North Africa, now what is happening in Tunisia, Algeria, the recent elections in Morocco, breaking the hold of political Islam, or in the sense of Islamic Muslim brotherhoods, in particular, both in Tunisia and Morocco. All these issues are of relevance to us, and also maybe comrades in South Africa as well, bringing the dimension from there. We don't know much about what's going on for quite some time, at least. I'm speaking for our party, not for other fraternal parties, of course. I think these are some ideas which I'm floating for you to discuss later, maybe. Thank you.
Thank you very much, comrade, indeed. Now, there's obviously a lot for parties to discuss about how to be able to take these matters forward in the way that you've just been discussing. But I am getting one or two more questions from the floor on what has been said this afternoon. And I'm going to actually read several questions together because we are running a little bit short of time. And then I think some of them are probably mostly directed towards comrades of the Tudor Party, but there are some general issues there too. So if I read three of the questions and then let there be a last round of coming in before we close and have the international. One question says, may I ask, how do the Iranian comrades approach and counter religious extremism in Iran, particularly when it is so embedded in the traditional sectors of Iranian society? So that's one. Another one, I live close to an Iranian Shia school that was used as a polling station for expat voters during the elections, and there was a protest outside which became aggressive to the extent the police turned up by Iranians and possibly others carrying old monarchist and Israeli flags. Do these kind of reactionary forces have any level of support within Iran, or are they purely organized in exile? And is there any extent to which opposition to the Islamist regime takes the form of nationalist anti-Arab chauvinism, as I have heard alleged? Clearly there is a section of the left in Britain who shy away from opposition to the clerical regime on the grounds of a simplistic version of anti-imperialism. Actually, that's two questions, so perhaps we'd better see who would like to come in on those first, and then we'll see if we have another chance for another question.
Thank you, Comrade Liz. I'll start and comrades could help on. So I think there are some, start with the second one where, if I understood the question correctly, it was related to influence of right-wing sort of opposition forces like monarchists and supporters of Israel in Iran. I think it's fair to say that these forces have significant resources in putting their views and ideas across, using all social media, and they're very well backed by imperialist forces and also their local reactionary in the region. So they do, put a lot of messages out in Iran, and I think it's fair to say that they do have some level of influence in the country. I think the fact of it is that there is so much anger and I would say hatred towards the current regime that anybody raising the flag of changing the regime would get some support, especially if you have significant resources in being able to broadcast those to the to the population. They have the use of channels like the BBC, the the international, which is backed by Saudi Arabia, and I think that has to be said, and that's one of the challenges facing the Iranian progressive forces, that we do not want to go through the process by which the democratic forces are denied the right of being the main force for change in our country. That is one of the dangers that, we had the experience during the revolution that we thought that following the collapse of the Shah, we can take it for granted that democratic rights and freedoms will be enshrined in the new system and democracy will flourish, which didn't happen because the progressive forces, especially the left, did not manage to come together and create a substantial force to take the country in a different direction. And that's one of the challenges we face today. And I think over the past few months, especially during the election, our party issued an open call to all the progressive forces, saying that we have a lot in common. There are a lot of the political issues we are raising are similar, and therefore we do need to work together towards a common goal and towards ensuring that the process of democratization in Iran post this regime is not hijacked once again by reactionary forces. So I think that was one of the questions, if I understood. You were breaking up in the first question, so I'm not sure I understood that fully, Comrade Liz. I apologize. I don't know if Comrade Navid or anybody else wants.
I could repeat the first question. May I ask, how do the Iranian comrades approach and counter religious extremism in Iran, particularly when it is so embedded in the traditional sectors of Iranian society?
Okay, so there are two bits to this question, and I think the latter part of the question is not very accurate in terms of saying this is embedded in the society. I don't think that's true. But we do, as progressives, we are against extremism of any sort. It's not just religious extremism. We are against any extremism, because I think extremism at the end of the day does not help the progressive forces and democratic forces in the country, working towards establishing the democratic rights and freedom of the people. I think it's fair to say that as far as our country is concerned and as far as the regime goes, they are extremists number one in the country in terms of how they have been suppressing people's rights and how savagely they've been attacking our people's rights. I think the examples of the uprisings of people both in 2017 and following that in 2019, where we had uprisings in more than 100 cities in Iran, where the regime's apparatus and security forces attacked people and arrested thousands of people, executed and killed some on the spot, showed that the regime is, in fact, and its approaches and policies is very much in line with what you would call religious extremism and their, manifestation as terrorist acts here and there. And I think, therefore, it is part of our struggle. It is part of the struggle of the progressive forces in Iran to deal with that. And, I think it's no secret that the regime backs a lot of these extremist forces in and around region, because it does serve its political purpose as part of extending its hegemony and influences in different countries of the region.
Thank you very much. Does anyone else on the panel want to come in on that? I'm just checking. No.
Liz, sorry, Chair.
Yeah.
Could we invite Comrade Farid Idris from Sudan, who had earlier indicated wanted to speak? Whether if he's in the room in the panel, could he speak? Yeah.
Yes, of course. Comrade Farid Idris, if you'd like to come in, please do now. I'm just looking to see if he is still here.
Thank you
He is.
for inviting us to contribute. Unfortunately, we are facing electricity shortcut, and now you can't see us.
We have a different connection. We can hear you though, comrade. We can hear you.
Yeah.
Let's give it a try.
I will give it a try, and thank you for Toda party to inviting us, and also thank you, and I'm greeting all comrades that taking place in this webinar seminar, and just I would like to talk about some specific issues that concern most of the parties that taking part in this seminar. If you compare ourselves, if I'm talking about Toda, talking about Sudanese Communist Party, we'd like to talk about the issue of political Islam, and that is a great influence or great impact on Sudan and in Iran. Although here in Sudan, we managed through a united front to overthrow this the political Islam regime from Sudan, but still there is an impact, and it needs time in order to get rid of the impact of the political Islam that had ruled Sudan for 30 years, and also the issue of militarization. And in Sudan, we now have more than 7 armed militias, and these also these are the issues of concern, and also it's an impact of the former regime who developed these militias. And thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very, very much, comrade. We are getting towards the close of our session, and we have got some very weighty questions that have come in that we haven't been able to deal with. And what I'm hoping is I'm going to tell you what some of them are, that you'll be able to deal with them in through your press and media. You'll be able to pick up the issues, and perhaps some of them might become topics of further similar seminars. But we've been asked, for example, how does the issue of climate change and inter-imperialist rivalry for resources and control influence international revolutionary conditions? How socialism and democracy can go hand in hand to make sure of defeat of capitalism while encouraging people to vote. I think that means in systems as they are. The impact of technological advances has been seen in the individualization of workers more than ever before, in the gig economy and elsewhere, in 0 hours contracts. How do you think the working class movement may address the increasingly precarious nature of work and the new dynamic that technological advances are creating for the class struggle? These are only some of the questions, comrades. I'm just going to suggest, and it is for 1 minute only, but if any of the panelists would like to come in for just a few, well, literally a few seconds to say anything at the end. Otherwise, I'm going to move now to a vote of thanks and the International. So does anyone want to wave or put their yellow hand up who's on the panel? They don't. They're thinking of the very, very weighty questions. Oh, and Comrade Navid does. Comrade Navid.
Thank you very much, Liz. I know that we are toward the end, and I'm not going to ask any question, but I just wanted to first to add, before you close the meeting, my thanks to all of the comrades. But I would like also to appeal that if comrades could send us as speedily as possible the text of their contribution, we would like to publish them as a volume to engage in this issue of communist and social movement, because we think that this is important. It could also trigger the other events that we are planning, we hope to plan. So please, if you could, send us your contribution before you forget, before they are misplaced, and before other events take over our attention. Thank you very much, Liz.
Thank you very much, Comrade Navid. So sadly, because I think we could have probably gone on for at least another hour and a half with our questions and our answers, and it's been fantastic discussion. But sadly, it is time to bring this seminar to a close. And I'd like to thank the Communist Party of Iran, the Tudor Party of Iran, so much for thinking of this particular way of celebrating their 80th anniversary. What a very fitting and generous way to celebrate. I know that there have been other celebratory events and publications, and that these still are continuing. But this in particular was such a very, very good concept, and the discussion has been fantastic. So thank you, and thank you also for the huge amount of work to the party that you have put in to organising this event, which is a truly international event, and we've been across time zones. I think we have a comrade with us where it is still only 9 o'clock in the morning. I'm sure that's right. So we're really across continents and able to hear each other's contributions on these incredibly significant themes that the Tudor Party identified for us. So thank you very much to the Tudor Party. Can I also, before I move to thank speakers and those of you who have joined us, just thank very much our technical support, which is in Canada and Britain, and not only for the work this afternoon, but also for the huge amount of work that has gone in to actually setting up this meeting and making it possible. I would, of course, like to thank so much all the parties who have participated in this seminar, the AKEL Cyprus, the SACP, the Communist Party of Iraq, the Communist Party of Lebanon, the Communist Party of Sudan, and the Communist Party of India. And of course, I thank the Tudor Party for setting up the meeting and inviting us all and hosting it, but also, of course, for your contribution too. And I would like to thank once again Professor Abramian for joining us. You were really able to set the meeting off in a most interesting, engaging and comprehensive manner, and your expertise and the ideas that you have been able to bring were really truly valuable, and we hope to see you again at other events. And thank you for your contributions as well as the meeting progressed. And finally, I'd like to say a very big thank you to everyone who has participated across the world. It's really great to see you all. We've had a lot of comrade friends and supporters in this meeting, but a huge number of similarly comrade friends and supporters joining us, watching the live streaming. And I know that that won't stop when this meeting stops, that the record will be there and comrades and friends will be able to look at that. So thank you very much. And finally, before the International, I would like again to congratulate the Tudor Party on its amazing struggle over 80 years, fighting against repression, in the face of repression, torture, imprisonment, and everything that has beset the leadership and members of the party. It has been an absolutely fantastic struggle, and I know that it will go on and on from today. And thank you for the fact that while you have been doing that and fighting for peace and justice in Iran, just a just world, a more equal future, that and for socialism, that you have carried that struggle into the international movement too. Congratulations, comrades, and solidarity from all of us. So thank you very much, and we will now move to the International. I won't come back after that. After the International, that will be the close of the meeting. So thank you very much, everyone.